This all happened at the Reloni Ducal Academy in the far west of the Empire, a place known as an ivory tower in the middle of nowhere. You know what I mean? The Duke's daughter, Kiana Frulei's laboratory was there. One day, they came to arrest her, and everyone with the surname Freely. The girl had no idea why she was being arrested, and she started cursing out the soldiers. It was then that they told her grandfather had committed treason. After Kiana's father mysteriously disappeared, Scary Freely had been like a father to her. She also had two reckless, troublemaking older brothers, and her cousin, Melissa, was so powerful she was almost called Saintess. It seemed no one in the family would commit such an act of betrayal, so Kiana believed the arrest was a complete fabrication. However, not only was she arrested, but she was also sentenced to death. As she was being dragged away, she saw the dean talking to a knight in the hallway. He said that if Kiana died, Professor Freely's patents would go directly to the academy, and that was the condition under which he had agreed to cooperate. The whole treason case was a huge sensation, even making the newspapers. Kiana Frulei was a genius magical engineer who researched magical tools. The field was all about math and physics, and Kiana held numerous patents. She had been at the academy for 7 years, and the dean had always taken good care of her. But now she realized he had sold her out for money. She swore revenge, vowing to destroy him and his entire family, even if it meant making a deal with the devil. She never imagined that at 23, having just become a professor, she would suddenly be sentenced to death and transported to the Empire. Kiana was locked in an underground prison near the Imperial Palace. Just as she was processing her terrible situation, she heard a voice behind her. It was her cousin. She couldn't believe she had been arrested too. However, Melissa, who possessed divine power, was happy to see her cousin. Kiana started questioning her about why their grandfather was accused of treason, insisting he would never do such a thing. Melissa also believed the charge was fabricated. The girl started to sob, but Kiana kept pressing her for answers. Melissa had been accused of treason because she had once rejected the prince. That prince was the type to hold a grudge and wanted to exact the same kind of revenge. Kiana glanced at Piaggi, the little bird that had fainted from the earlier magic. She couldn't believe Prince Heaton would do this to them. The Freely family had recently been supporting the crown prince. Just then, a guard's voice rang out, ordering the criminals to be taken away. The girls panicked, especially Melissa, who wasn't ready to die. She couldn't believe that despite having divine power, this would be her end. Kiana noticed her cousin's eyes starting to roll strangely as Melissa wailed that she should have just entered the convent, that she might have survived then. Kiana started shaking her cousin's shoulders, begging her to calm down, but she had decided to try and go back in time. She planned to use her divine power to go back 1 year, retain her memories, and immediately join the convent. Just as Kiana was trying to explain that going back in time was impossible, she saw a bright light. All she could think was that she couldn't die for nothing, and then she felt herself drifting off to sleep. When she came to her senses again, she heard an assistant professor waking her up. The girl found herself at a desk, even though she had just been in a prison cell. The assistant reminded her that she shouldn't be sleeping in the lab. This guy was a co-author on the project because he was related to the dean. Kiana was so stunned by what was happening that she blurted out without thinking. She told him he had no right to criticize her and threatened to smash his face in if he didn't get lost. The guy didn't want any trouble and quickly left the office. Kiana started looking around and found herself in a lab coat, the same kind she wore as an assistant professor during her student days. She thought to herself, maybe she shouldn't have blown up at that guy like that. She saw today's newspaper on the floor, dropped by her colleague. The girl reached for it, wanting to confirm something. She was stunned when she read an article about her cousin, Melissa. The article said she had apparently applied to become a nun and was dedicating herself to charity work. Then, Kiana checked the date and realized she had gone back 1 year in time, just as her cousin had wished, and she still had all her memories. The girl realized that her cousin had actually reversed time. She had done it with some kind of divine power. The first thing she decided to do was send a letter directly to Melissa at the convent. She asked what would happen to the Freely family now that she had left the estate. In the meantime, she planned to hide out here and make some plans for the future. A few days passed since then, and the creature Melissa had summoned, a Piaggi, brought Kiana a letter. The little bird, holding the envelope in its beak, started tapping on the window. But the girl didn't open it for a while, and the Piaggi started to worry. They could see through the glass that she looked terrible. Kiana at that moment looked more like a tormented ghost. But when she saw the letter, she perked up and immediately started reading. Melissa wrote that she was grateful for her cousin's concern and believed there was a shred of kindness deep inside her. Even though everyone else thought she was just an arrogant, demonic rich girl, she confessed that she had realized she needed to become a nun. She took it as a revelation from the heavens, which is why she decided to join the convent. Kiana found this strange, since Melissa had only thought of it to save her own life. Now, her cousin was planning a trip with other volunteers, and, as a farewell, she sent Kiana a notarized property transfer deed. Melissa's gift turned out to be the Piaggi bird. Since she was no longer a member of the Freely family, she no longer needed the summoned creature. The family was famous for being able to summon their own unique creatures, an ability that usually manifested around the age of 8. These creatures possessed all sorts of abilities, but Kiana had none. Even as she grew up, she never managed to summon anything. Now, her cousin had given her a summoned creature as she left the estate, but the little bird warned her that the time regression hadn't gone smoothly. When Melissa cast the spell, she ended up making contact with her cousin and Piaggi, and the summoned creature, Piaggi, was caught between them. For some reason, it wasn't Melissa who retained the memories of the regression, but only Kiana and Piaggi. The only thing left for Melissa was the desire to become a nun. So she stormed straight to the convent and made a scene. But Piaggi had no intention of telling her she had returned to the past. The summoned creatures only swore allegiance to members of the Freely family and no one else. So they would rather serve another freely, even if they were a difficult person. The act of summoning itself was very important to them. Kiana found it strange that the summoned creature recognized her as a Freely and not just some random person. The little bird pointed to her notes, wanting to know what the scribbles were. They were Kiana's records of her agonizing over what to do next, because the Freely family could be driven into a corner again. Kiana had a plan to save the duchy from this crisis, though she only had one clue at the moment. She knew nothing about what was happening in the Empire because she was stuck in a remote area. But now, an excellent solution had presented itself. Piaggi had been with Melissa the whole time and could spill all the inside details of what happened in the Empire. The girl gave the bird some paper and told it to write everything down within 2 weeks. But it said no because it was too tired and it had to write down several years' worth of events. Because of this, Piaggi thought Kiana was a really demanding person. 3 hours later, the girl decided to check what the bird had written, but it couldn't remember many details, and Kiana told it to try harder. Piaggi started to complain, saying he didn't know Kiana was such a weirdo and a workaholic. But then, memories started flooding into his mind. So he told the girl to wait a moment, because he had found a method for a summoned creature to directly transfer memories to its master. The little bird immediately perched on Kiana's head. The memories that were supposed to be transferred as visions instead hit her in the form of text. It was more like reading a novel with Melissa as the protagonist, because Piaggi could only see and hear everything from Melissa's perspective. This information transfer was possible because his connection with Kiana wasn't perfect yet. She also discovered that her cousin was quite popular with men. Melissa was supposed to be engaged to Rodrigo, but she had these men wrapped around her finger. Sometimes, Kiana was remembered as the villain who had almost bullied Melissa. The men promised to heal the trauma Kiana had supposedly inflicted on her in childhood, and they even wanted to challenge her to a duel. But she was long gone from there. It annoyed her, but figuring out what happened in the Empire was the priority, especially the duchy's treason charge and everything that led to the tragedy. Kiana was even confused about whether to call it the past or the present. Everything was written down like a story, and she made a decision. She decided to call it the original story because she could read it over and over. According to the original story, there were certain points she needed to follow. After careful consideration, Kiana realized she had to return to the duchy. She was the only one who knew what the future held, so she had to be the one to take the lead. Just as she was lost in thought, someone started knocking on the door. The voice from behind the door announced that the dean was summoning Miss Kiana. Apparently, the entrance orientation was about to begin, and Kiana needed to give a speech. The girls sadly recalled the last time this happened. It was a welcome event held by the academy for new students and their parents. The dean wanted to use Kiana to attract attract more students, as the tuition wasn't cheap, and that Dean valued money more than anyone. The girl came up with a plan and promised she would be right there. Before returning to the duchy, she decided to teach that Dean a lesson. The auditorium of Reloni Academy was already packed. The Dean welcomed the new students and their parents, thanked them for coming, and then prepared to introduce someone. He called her the pride of the academy, Professor Kiana Frelai. The girl greeted everyone and mentioned that she was currently pursuing her doctorate. Then she explained that magical engineering was based on math and science, and she was prepared to talk briefly about science, for which the Dean praised her. He friendly placed a hand on her shoulder, but she immediately smacked him with a pointer and calmly continued talking about the connection between science and their daily lives. Behind the podium where no one could reach, Kiana also kicked the Dean in the knee. The sharp pain made him fall to the ground with a thud. He was completely stunned. Kiana wasn't done yet. She poured some liquid from a test tube on him, explaining that this was gravity. Then she calmly asked the Dean for his cooperation, saying the lecture was in progress. Immediately after, she slapped him on the back of the head, and not lightly. She gave him a sweet smile and explained that this was the law of action and reaction. The students loved the lesson, finding it super engaging. Then Kiana grabbed the Dean by the hair, saying this is how objects move. It turned out his hair was just a wig, and she immediately threw it into the crowd. The wig flew across the entire auditorium. Then out the window, past some stunned academy staff. Kiana explained to the students that this was called projectile motion. At the academy, they study all these laws and create magical tools like, for example, a magical adhesive that requires a special solvent to remove. The girl squeezed a bit of glue from a tube onto a piece of paper, then held it up to the Dean, preparing to stick it on his bald head. On the back of the paper, she had written the word trash, and then she slapped it right onto his forehead. The Dean started screaming, demanding someone get him the solvent. But Kiana just left him like that and announced that attending this academy was not mandatory. With that, she left the academy, even though she had grown fond of the place. With a clear conscience, she hopped onto a carriage bound for the Empire. Piaggi rode with her, wondering what the young lady planned to do next. Getting into politics was out of the question. She had no connections and no money. She considered just telling her family everything. But from a look on the bird's face, she knew it would sound insane. I mean, she couldn't just announce that she was reliving her life and that the prince was planning to frame the Freely family. Besides, she didn't even know the reason why, and no one would believe the story anyway. She had already brought her family enough grief as a child. She had been a little troublemaker since she was young, so now she needed to handle things properly because a bad reputation and a rocky past would come back to bite her. So, plan B was, she decided to help Heaton's enemy, the one who thought the Freely family would support the crown prince. Now Kiana needed to find a way to take the lead, which meant making an enemy of her enemy her ally. First, she would contact him. Sometime later, in the capital of the Lavin Empire, rumors reached the prince's ears that Princess Kiana was returning to the empire. She had even applied to revoke some of her patents, which threw the academy into complete chaos. There weren't many details, but it sounded like the academy was caught completely off guard. Considering Kiana was heading to the capital, she was going straight for the Freely Duchy. People speculated that she was tired of doing research in a remote area, and the prince was actually a little excited by the news. After being apart for so long, he would finally get to see her. The Freely family's estate was just outside the capital of the Talus Empire. Piaggi was thrilled to finally see the estate, as they were almost there. The little bird even wanted to fly out the window to get a better look, but Kiana caught it. She had prepared a letter that she needed Piaggi to deliver as soon as possible. The feathered fellow wasn't happy, feeling he wasn't a servant and deserved a break. But the girl again asked him to secretly deliver the letter into a mailbox. Piaggi didn't like the task, as it would take about a week. Secret delivery. This was the summoned creature's special skill, allowing it to secretly teleport small objects over short distances in about a week's time. Given such a task, Piaggi once again felt his mistress was ruthless, and he started complaining about all the mental trauma she was causing him. The girl told the little bird not to make a big deal out of it, explaining that souls can't get hurt because they don't have capillaries. Knowing it was useless to argue, the bird just glared at her fiercely and wished for magical engineering to be completely wiped from existence. As Piaggi flew out the window, the coachman announced they had arrived. The girl couldn't believe she was back in this place that held absolutely no good memories for her. The servants were there to greet her, surprised by Miss Kiana's return. We received news right away that after that assassination attempt, the duchy was in chaos. One of the maids had tried to take out the Duke with a poison dagger, but she botched it. Now the servants were lining up to announce Kiana's arrival, but she stopped them. After the grueling journey, she just wanted to get some rest. She just didn't want to face her grandfather, to see him right after coming back. But she needed to see him, to warn him about what was coming, to give him a heads up. However, news of Kiana's return quickly reached Scary Freely. Her grandfather, the master of the estate and a sword master. A servant reported that the young lady had gone to rest and promised to visit the Duke tomorrow. The old man found it strange that she had shown up unannounced. As he tried to figure out why, all sorts of wild theories started popping into his head. Kiana used to lock herself in her room for long periods, and when she came out, she would take her anger out on Melissa. She became distant and withdrawn, and her grandfather could no longer communicate with her. When she left for the academy, she swore she would never return to the estate. Scary blamed himself, thinking he had been too strict in the past, and had been constantly thinking about how to get her back. He just couldn't understand why his granddaughter hated this place so much. Then Joshua listed all the reasons one would want to escape from here. Hearing this, Scary realized this was no environment to raise a child. Basically, all they had was money, power, prestige, and a fancy title. But now Kiana was back, and her grandfather felt she'd had a change of heart. The servant reported that the assassination attempt was under investigation. The Duke ordered a sharp and capable maid to be assigned to Kiana. He himself planned to spend the evening in the greenhouse, thinking things over. That night, Kiana had a nightmare where she was being chased by voices, claiming she had stolen Melissa's summoned creature. She also dreamed of a young mother collapsing in tears, and in addition, Marquis Caesar was providing a large grant for research. Then the girl saw a noose hanging in front of her, and the dean's voice buzzed, saying she couldn't leave that place. It terrified her. Kiana woke up in bed in a cold sweat and immediately noticed the personal maid they had assigned to her. The maid reported that the Duke was still asleep and the rest of the family was not at the estate. Next, she showed the young lady a stack of letters that had arrived from the academy last night. When she suggested breakfast, Kiana only asked for coffee. The maid was surprised that the young lady wanted coffee when she was unwell, but realizing this servant was sent to watch her, she told her not to argue. Still, she understood the maid was just doing her job, and seeing her growing concern, she promised not to ask for a replacement. She even joked that the maid could brag about how she spied on the family leadership. Then she asked for more coffee and said she was going to Roden Street. After that, the maid became flustered, but Kiana practically pushed her out the door. Still, she had confirmed her plan, which sounded completely insane. She was actually going to visit her jerk of a second brother, Joshua, soon. The maid had Kiana ready, but she wasn't sure if the plaid ribbon really suited her. Miss Kiana had a plan that would help her talk to her grandfather like family. She wanted to do something good first to make up for all of Scary's messes. He had a summoned creature named Howl that could absorb and purify toxins. But for some reason, after Kiana left, Howl never appeared again in the original story. He only showed up when her grandfather and Melissa were arrested, and he was in terrible shape. He must have absorbed so many toxins that he couldn't even stand. Kiana had about 6 hours before she had to see her grandfather. This gave her time to go to Roden Street. There, she heard gossip that Joshua was always rolling in money. The jewelry he wore alone could buy a mansion. His summoned creature was a snake with the ability to sniff out money. But no one knew where his wealth came from, and everyone assumed it was the family's dirty money, which he used to buy the approval of everyone around him. Joshua noticed the Freely family carriage come to a sudden stop. He first thought it was Alex, but that guy would rather die than ride in the carriage. But then he saw Kiana step out of the carriage and congratulate him on his newfound wealth. She even compared him to a nouveau riche who only hoards cash. Then she handed him a small package, a housewarming gift. It was a vase with a plaid pattern, which Joshua thought was in terrible taste. The girl didn't get angry, saying that ignorance wasn't a sin, after all. Then she pulled a small, thick magazine out of her bag and smashed it right in the face of a nearby man who was talking about inferiority complexes and all that nonsense. The girl declared that wasn't the reason her brother lived lavishly. It was just his personal taste. With that, she shooed away the gossips. Her final command was to stop gossiping about other people's lives. The man, clutching his aching forehead, was surprised but didn't argue with Kiana. She explained that she just couldn't stand this kind of soap opera, and she hated seeing her brother's dirty laundry on the cover of a magazine. Joshua invited his sister, whom he hadn't seen in 6 years, inside. She looked around his living room. He had clearly spent a fortune on it. Even the throw pillows looked expensive. Kiana thought her brother hadn't changed a bit, and that talking to him always brought her good luck. Joshua started asking why she had returned without telling him. She changed the subject to the magazine editor, Lorelei, whom she considered a tough character. Leah was a summoned creature that could take human form. That gossip magazine was selling like crazy, and Joshua was making a killing from it. He had informants everywhere, so he knew about his sister's return immediately. There was nothing that happened in the capital that this guy didn't know about. The girl admitted she only had a few questions for him, and then she would leave. She was curious what he would think if his summoned creature got sick. Joshua would rather suffer himself, because they came into this world for their masters. If someone could cure the creature, Joshua would repay them with a fortune. Kiana wanted to cure Howl so her grandfather could stand up to Heaton. But Joshua declared that there were no doctors who specialized in the illnesses of summoned creatures. He was curious why Kiana had suddenly decided to help the family, but she didn't think it was suspicious, since they were family and should help each other. Joshua nearly choked on his drink when he heard her say that. His sister would never have said something like that before. It was as if she had been replaced by someone else. He even started to suspect that Kiana's body was now occupied by another soul. The girl looked surprised, but she understood his suspicion. So he asked her to tell him a secret that only the two of them knew, although they didn't really have any secrets, since they weren't that close. But she reminded him of the romance novels that only he read. After that, Joshua let out a heavy sigh, convinced that the person before him was his sister. Then Kiana started asking him about the Crown Prince. The guy was confused, not understanding why Kiana was so interested in him. However, what he knew about the prince was the same as what everyone else knew. 6 years ago, he went hunting in the Edba Mountains with his entourage. He fell off a cliff there and vanished without a trace. The emperor eventually fell ill, and Prince Heaton ascended the throne, but the emperor had always opposed it until the crown prince's life or death could be confirmed. This was truly all that Joshua Freiling knew. Kiana asked him to tell her if he found out anything about the crown prince. Furthermore, she was also interested in the connection between Prince Heaton, the crown prince, and their family. This request made Joshua uncomfortable. He thought meddling in royal affairs was just asking for trouble. It seemed he genuinely cared about his sister, but she told him not to worry and to just let her know if he heard anything. Her brother wouldn't let it go, pleading with Kiana not to get involved in these matters any further, saying it could seriously damage the reputation of the ducal house. No one could say for sure how the head of the Freely family would react to this. He had 2 sons, one of whom was Kiana's father. The second son, Scary, fell in love with a commoner and cut ties with the family. Kiana's mother also ran away, leaving only a note, eloping with a coachman in the middle of the night. She fell off a cliff while trying to shake off some knights and died on the spot. The girl's father became emaciated and went to the northern duchy to subjugate monsters, while Kiana, who looked just like her mother, was the only child without a summoned beast. The psychological pressure she endured was unimaginable, but it wasn't just her. She and her brothers were each thrown into turmoil by the whole situation. She confessed that she genuinely congratulated Joshua on his independence and decided to come clean about something she had been researching since childhood. It was a magical device that could change her eye color, and she also wanted to find out the truth about her own birth. Joshua didn't understand why she would think about such things, but even after becoming a professor, Kiana was always called the shame of the Freely family behind her back, so what she went through was not without meaning. She remembered how terrible Joshua had become because of their parents, and how the nanny tried to comfort him, telling him that such things were common. And so, he began digging into the scandals of high society, and that magazine made him a fortune. Based on Kiana's initial story, she was able to piece together some of their background. The guy hated what his father did to his mother, and he didn't even think about the children he had abandoned. Joshua couldn't understand at the time how parents of 3 children could be so irresponsible, and even his grandfather couldn't soothe his pain. His grandfather and Alex both disapproved of his actions, believing he still hadn't moved on from his old wounds. Kiana, however, had a different opinion. She saw her brother's potential and talent. Despite starting from a chaotic past, he was still forging his own path. So Kiana decided to support his gossip magazine. Her confession seemed a bit forceful, as you could tell from his expression. So she added that it was okay for him to act like a rebellious teenager, and besides, he had already developed a taste for the finer things in life. After that, there were a few minutes of silence between them before Kiana threw the sofa cushion back at him and prepared to leave. Joshua noticed she really liked the cushion and told her to keep it, especially since she had given him that vase, so he wanted to give this in return. He also told his sister not to think of herself as the shame of the Frelly family. He felt he was the real troublemaker, as he caused far more trouble than she did. Kiana's heart skipped a beat in a good way. Joshua told her to calm down and use her damn head. She said goodbye to her brother, telling him to take care of himself and remember what she had asked. He just gave her a complicated look as she turned to leave. But then he finally told her to leave all the Empire's crap to their grandfather, because the Emperor was about to die and Prince Heaton would take the throne, and that was that. For the past 6 years, there had been no word from the missing prince. But then Joshua noticed how thin his sister's arms were and started to panic. To him, her face was also unusually pale, and he felt the Academy wasn't feeding her properly. The girl didn't understand why he was suddenly making a fuss about it now. I mean, he hadn't even contacted her once in 6 years. Then she slammed the door shut and drove off, while Joshua just stood there watching her go. He didn't understand what she was talking about, because he had been sending her letters every month. Now he found it strange that his sister hadn't mentioned the letters at all. He thought Kiana was just brushing him off and hadn't even invited him to her graduation exhibition. Realizing something must be wrong, Joshua decided to follow his sister. He was determined to have a proper talk with her this time. Kiana was in a carriage with her maid when she noticed they were taking a different route. The lady wanted to stop by a store to buy some necessities. The royal family had never shown any interest in her before, so she felt they didn't care. They hadn't seen each other in 6 years, and Kiana had even invited them to her graduation, but they had stood her up. If we leave everything to grandfather, the whole family will be in big trouble again. When she was 13, Melissa, who was the same age, came to live with them after her parents died. Grandfather took in the girl from a distant branch of the family, but she could summon a creature and hoped to see Kiana do the same. Melissa wanted to get close to her cousin, and also to her never-appearing summoned beast. Kiana was convinced her cousin had stolen her Piaggi, so she made her life a living hell. By the time they were both 16, one night, Kiana was caught chasing Melissa with a knife. Everyone thought she had gone too far, but the girl had other plans. Kiana had already created a magical gadget that could change eye color, but she didn't make it for herself, so she wouldn't be a laughingstock. Melissa was her target from the start. She was going to change her eye color, so no one would ever say she was a better fit to be Miss Frelly. It required the user's blood to work, which was why Kiana stabbed her cousin. But her grandfather thought she had crossed a line and scolded her harshly for it. Despite this, Kiana realized then that if things continued this way, she would be trapped in misery over something she couldn't have. Her actions were foolish. Changing Melissa's eyes wouldn't solve anything. Kiana asked her grandfather to send her to the academy in the Duchy of Relin. She decided to bury the artifact without using it, but since she had spent her entire childhood making it, it was too wasteful to throw away. So the girl decided to figure out what to do with it later. It took her several days to reach Relin, in the far west of the Empire. On the way, she needed to use the restroom and had them stop the carriage. Although the knight told her not to go far, Kiana had to go a little deeper. She stopped deep in the bushes of a wooded area and suddenly spotted a robed figure there. Seeing a strange person in the woods scared her a little, though from his appearance, he seemed to be just a child. Kiana noticed his ornate clothes and guessed he was a noble. Then he told her to stay away and pretend she never saw him at all. The girl didn't know who he was or why he was so worried, and all he did was tell her again, "Mind your own business." Kiana didn't want to argue, but she also didn't want to leave him there alone. She still told him to be careful and walked off in another direction. She left so quickly that even the boy found it a bit strange. He watched her figure disappear into the bushes. But then Kiana turned around and came back to him. The kid asked her why, and you could even hear a hint of excitement in his voice. She just told him to wait a moment, promising she would leave soon, and confessed that she had a magical item she was about to throw away. Then she took out the artifact and handed it to him, thinking he needed it more. In the worst-case scenario, he could pawn it for a considerable sum of money. Instead of admitting she made it, Kiana claimed it was made by someone else who was no longer around. She even told him how to use the thing, but that he only had one chance. The kid couldn't understand at all why she would give him something so valuable, and she admitted she was worried about leaving him alone in the woods. So I gave him the gift to ease my own conscience. It was a useful tool for the kid, and he thanked Kiana for it. She sensed a trustworthy aura from him. Then she asked him how on earth he ended up here. The kid explained that everyone had betrayed him, but now he was out for revenge. Kiana suddenly found it strange that he was being so open with her. But anyway, she decided to leave him be, once again telling him to be careful. As a final farewell, the kid promised that a long time from now, when he could disappear completely, he would let her know if he was dead or alive. He also asked her to set up a secret mailbox address so they could stay in touch. She found that strange too, but she promised to think about it. Then the kid gave her his secret mailbox number, and they said their goodbyes. That was the last time they saw each other, but Kiana was in a great hurry at the time. Then she heard the news of the Crown Prince's death. He was said to have fallen to his death. The girl suddenly realized she had seen the Crown Prince before. He had silver hair, blue eyes, and was already a master swordsman. Crown Prince Talus was always surrounded by people who adored him. He was the center of attention, and nobles constantly requested an audience with him. If it weren't for his baby fat from childhood, he would have been the spitting image of the emperor. But due to Kiana's gloomy personality, she always avoided such dazzling people. She felt they wouldn't get along, but the boy in the forest really looked like a prince. She set up that secret mailbox, but never used the damn thing once. And the former crown prince, he could always carry out ruthless revenge without getting his own hands dirty. Kiana's plan was to help speed up his revenge so he could take down Heaton for good. So when she arrived in the capital, she had Piaggi drop a letter in his mailbox, but it would take some time for Piaggi to return. Then everyone would believe it was Kiana who snatched the summoned beast from Melissa. I mean, she had bullied her cousin before because she felt it should have been hers. Now she had to figure out how to tell her family about her cousin's gift. As she was pondering all this, they arrived at the store she needed to go to. Meanwhile, some guy was agonizing over what to wear. His servant didn't understand why he was going to so much trouble since he and the princess were just using each other. But the guy wanted to look presentable so she wouldn't dump him prematurely. Then he told his servant not to overthink it and just help him get dressed. When everything was ready, he set off to meet that special someone. Kiana walked into Taylor's general store, which had everything you could imagine, from emergency medical supplies to, well, enhancers. The girl told her maid to grab a bit of everything and take it to the carriage. She was thinking that her grandfather should be awake by now, and after everything that had happened, she felt awkward facing him. Whenever she was around him, she always doubted whether she was really his biological granddaughter. But regardless, she was determined to prove her worth. Damn it, she had earned some respect at the academy, at least. Suddenly, the store door was pushed open, and she saw a very handsome guy. He was wearing expensive clothes, but tried to act casual and inconspicuous. Kiana was sure there was no one like him in the capital. 6 years ago, this man had walked past her, leaving behind an incredibly pleasant scent. His movements were fluid and elegant, yet he seemed completely normal. But then another person caught her eye, and she turned. Standing there was a guy with a squid for a head, who said he was from the Perves estate. He was wondering why she hadn't come over, while Kiana was in shock that a squid could talk. Then it hit her that this was Rodrigo Perves, the guy she used to chase after as a child. She apologized, explaining that she was still in dark adaptation mode. Then, realizing this wasn't common knowledge, she tried to clarify, like how your eyes need time to adjust when you go from a bright place into complete darkness. Her vision finally adjusted, and she could see his real head. The guy thought she was still holding a grudge over the rumors that he was going to marry Melissa. I mean, she didn't even greet him properly. Then he explained that those talks were just for fun, nothing serious. Anyway, Kiana had suddenly left for the academy, so he told her to forget about it. Then the girl asked him to calculate the derivative of a function, but he had no idea what she was talking about, so Kiana bluntly said they were too different. Immediately after, she threw more science questions at him, and he was still clueless. Then she decided to let him off the hook and just greeted him politely. Then she sarcastically remarked that Rodrigo should become a top chef since he was so good at stirring up trouble between her and Melissa since they were kids. The guy was speechless, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Kiana added salt to the wound, saying Rodrigo only wanted to marry into the Frelly family to one-up his older brother. Then she told him to focus on improving his, personal charm. I mean, there's a reason Melissa ran off to a convent on the eve of their engagement, right? Like how she'd rather serve the oppressed than live with Rodrigo. Her voice grew louder and more piercing. Even the customers started leaving the store to avoid the fallout. Just then, the shopkeeper yelled at Kiana, asking her to take it outside, saying it was bad for business. The girl apologized for causing a scene. Rodrigo realized she was as reckless as ever. He told her she'd been away for so long she had forgotten her place. The Duke grabbed her arm, declaring that she wouldn't get away from him this time. Then she remembered chasing him because of his red eyes, which were just like the Frelly family's. Back then, she was just obsessed with the eyes, and Rodrigo was a convenient choice. Now he was convinced she would do anything for him, just to see him smile. But then Kiana dropped a bombshell, saying she had always liked Alex. She turned the tables on him, saying that now it was Rodrigo chasing her because she was from the Frelly family and he was set to marry her. Even with her past, the Duke's face went blank, but he didn't deny her words. Then he claimed the Frelly family would be happy to dump a troublemaker like her on anyone, which surprised Kiana, because she was about to become the apple of the family's eye. But Rodrigo told her not to get her hopes up with a malicious smirk. Just then, Kiana decided to end the pointless argument and turned to leave. Suddenly, the handsome rich guy stepped forward, declaring that Miss Frelly was not lying. The girl remembered seeing this handsome man just recently. He stepped forward and accused Rodrigo of not answering the question directly. The heroic knight had seen the Duke's son's behavior, and he grabbed the hand Rodrigo was using to hold the girl, and squeezed it hard. He declared that this guy was more of a villain here. They locked eyes, and Prince Rodrigo saw a warning in the other's gaze. Kiana gave a meaningful cough, and both men turned their attention to her. Then the handsome guy confessed he had been looking for her and asked for a moment of her time. He had the kind of face that could get him anything he wanted, but Kiana valued her time too much, so she turned him down. One moment the guy was full of confidence. The next he felt completely rejected and caught off guard. He felt terrible and had to flee the store. Outside, his manservant Ronyak noticed he was down in the dumps from being snubbed by the lady. He told him not to mind it, saying she probably had her reasons. Then he suggested they could find another chance to meet, perhaps on official business. But the boss was in no mood for that and told his servant to be quiet. A short while later, Miss Kiana returned to the Frelly estate, but that little encounter had left her in a very foul mood. Her maid followed behind, asking if she wanted something to eat since she had missed lunch. The girl told her to forget it and ordered her to take the things inside. Besides, she had juice at Joshua's place, even if it was just juice. Now she was getting annoyed, feeling that the mansion was just too big. But she noticed the maid didn't seem tired at all and complimented her stamina. Then she blurted out that if the maid brought her coffee on time, she'd get a bonus. After that, Kiana headed towards the estate's greenhouse. At the entrance, the maid reminded her that she might need the Duke's permission, because it was a restricted area and no one had been inside for years. Kiana told her to mind her own business and continued inside. She saw a giant bird sleeping peacefully in its nest. It was Duke's scary summoned beast, Howl. The creature thought she had just wandered in by mistake and told her to get lost. In Kiana's memory, this creature once soared proudly over the mansion. She was about 6 years old then and desperately wanted to meet something like it. At the time, Kiana believed her summoned beast would surely be a bird. But looking at it now, she actually felt a bit disgusted. Nevertheless, she yelled at the bird, saying it had no right to tell Miss Frelly to leave. She even promised she could cure it if it cooperated. Besides, she wasn't the kind of doctor who couldn't cure a summoned beast. Then the girl whipped around to her maid, startling her, and demanded that she make sure no one came in for the next 2 hours. So, Duke Scary found out that the maid who tried to kill him had committed suicide, and that Kiana had left the estate this morning. The old man had expected his granddaughter to come running to see him immediately, but now he felt that the estate was still a living hell for her. I mean, it wasn't just her. All his grandchildren were desperate to get out of here. The maid looked at the Duke with sympathy, but said nothing. There hadn't been peace in the estate for a long time, and even Joshua had left. He had stormed out, saying he would never set foot in this house again. Those words were seared into Scary's memory, stinging him deeply. The maid understood the Duke's feelings. She had children and grandchildren of her own. She assured him that now was a good opportunity to mend his relationship with Kiana. Scary had always expected his grandchildren to change their attitudes, but he never thought of changing himself. And now, he decided to give it a try. Just then, a servant burst into the office, saying there was an emergency. He announced that Master Joshua had just arrived at the estate. The news was shocking, and the Duke felt his grandson had finally lost his mind. After all, he had said when he left that he would only come back if he had gone completely mad. Nevertheless, he quickly put on his coat and hurried to see his grandson. It didn't take long for him to reach the drawing room, where Joshua was waiting for him. At first, they just stared at each other with a look of disdain. Then the old man wondered why his grandson had decided to show his face here again after he had practically aired the Frowley family's dirty laundry all over the capital. Scary thought he was a terrible grandson, someone who had no consideration for his grandfather's feelings. He went on a long, angry rant, but it was just his way of showing he cared. Joshua explained that he came back because Kiana was acting strangely, and he was worried that she had become thin and pale. Their shouting even startled the butler, who thought they had both gone mad. He then reported that Miss Kiana had gone to the greenhouse. Hearing this, Duke Scary was instantly stunned, not knowing what to think because his summoned beast, Howl, was there, and the old man began to worry. He immediately ran in that direction, but his grandson kept telling him to calm down on the way. But when it came to his familiar, he couldn't stay calm at all. The kid understood how he felt. He would have done the same, but he needed him to keep his cool. The Duke stopped dead in his tracks and gave his grandson a very fierce look. Then he started running towards the greenhouse again, frantic about the creature. Kiana's maid stopped him at the entrance, telling him not to go in, because the young lady had ordered that no one was to enter for 2 hours. The Duke was furious, thinking the maid was being insolent, and ordered her to move. But she held her ground, as the young lady had posted her there as a guard. Joshua was surprised his sister hadn't hit the maid. And yet, every word Kiana said was like a heavy punch. Instead of arguing, the maid took the young lady's words as constructive criticism, which made her reflect on herself. Moreover, she had caught a hint of kindness in her words. Joshua remembered noticing the same thing when his sister accused him of living extravagantly. The old Duke sensed that perhaps all hope was not lost after all. Then the maid chimed in, saying she noticed the young lady was quite sharp, so she decided to trust her completely from then on. She even pleaded with the others to trust Kiana, as they would an academy genius. Scary suddenly realized he had never truly trusted his granddaughter, and Joshua noted that he hadn't trusted any of them either, even though he cared for them. Scary's excuse was always that they were problem children, and he just couldn't trust them, despite all his efforts to keep the family business intact. The Duke's maid, standing behind them, worried this would escalate into a full-blown argument. So to distract them, she pretended she was about to faint. It worked. The men shut their mouths and turned their attention to her. But then they heard Kiana yelling at her patient to calm down. The bird was just excited that its body could move with great power again. Just then, everyone saw the greenhouse doors fly open. Inside, a giant bird was soaring through the space, looking magnificent. Meanwhile, Kiana was buried in a pile of documents, furiously writing down how energetic and content the summoned beast looked, while the young lady was focused on her research. Scary, speechless with amazement, walked towards her, followed by his entire entourage. Without looking up, the girl told them to wait a moment, because she was super focused and you just couldn't disturb her at a time like this. Scary, Joshua, and the other servants froze in place, waiting to see what would happen next. A few seconds later, Kiana came to her senses and immediately scolded the maid for letting people in. The maid started making excuses, saying she did her best, and then immediately began praising the young lady's results. But the young lady started nagging again about how long the maid took to bring the coffee. But then Hal leaned down to her and thanked her for healing him. He thought he would remain helpless forever, but now he could go back to helping Scary. The girl just told him to take it easy, as the toxins were still being flushed out of his system. Then the Duke approached, not quite sure how to express his gratitude. Besides, this was the first time they had met since Kiana left. As a child, she always felt small in her grandfather's presence. And after being scolded over the incident with Melissa, she felt even more unable to look him in the eye. Having received no news at the academy, Kiana felt this was probably it, because she still believed she wasn't Scary's biological granddaughter. But even without a blood tie, she still had the right to hold her head high in front of him. She declared it wasn't about medicine, but the power of science and magic. She had developed a magical artifact, but Joshua told her to spare them the details, because that kind of stuff always bored people. So Kiana explained the treatment in simple terms. The artifact was complex for others, but not for Kiana. She was able to calculate the ever-changing concentration of toxins in Howl's body. After all, she was a talented and capable girl. But no matter how hard she tried, she just couldn't summon her own familiar. Then Duke Scary softly thanked his granddaughter for saving Howl, even though the old man had never done a damn thing for her. But Kiana suddenly declared that her grandfather had done a lot for her. I mean, he gave her a monthly allowance just for being a Frelly. The old man did try to be generous, but still kept it within reasonable limits. Now he wondered why Kiana had suddenly returned. But this was her home, even though they had practically kicked her out after the knife incident. She could have been a professor at the academy, but she changed her mind. Still, her grandfather was happy she was able to get an education, though he at least thought graduate school was a waste of time, which frustrated Kiana. Joshua noted how potent the venom in Howl was, knowing no one could have survived it. He was curious how Kiana had extracted such a potent toxin, while the bird rushed to Scary, happy about its impending recovery. The Duke embraced his familiar with a broad smile and thanked his granddaughter. Kiana confessed that she had just been passing by yesterday and happened to find Howl. She had felt sorry for him, so she wanted to try and nurse him back to health, especially since the summoned creature meant so much to her grandfather. For a moment, everyone quietly celebrated the bird's recovery, before Joshua wondered aloud why there was so much coffee around. The girl simply explained that people always chug a lot of coffee when they work. Then, the maid, who couldn't even be bothered to hide the fact that she was a spy, handed the Duke a report. The old man began to read intently, and Joshua leaned in to look as well. Suddenly, the brother, with a look of confusion, asked his sister to explain something. He was worried that she had barely eaten anything, and she admitted to having only had cookies and juice. Joshua started to worry that she ate just as poorly at the academy. She retorted a bit, but admitted that she had been frantically writing her thesis. She had to spend up to 16 hours in the lab. She cut down on her meals because eating a large one would make her sleepy. Now, both the old man and his familiar were worried about her condition, and Kiana added that she couldn't eat or sleep properly while working. She was constantly chugging energy drinks, coffee, and taking stomach medicine. It was now clear why the young lady was so thin. She had been living like this for 6 years. But she loved magic engineering, and everyone loved her research. This didn't sit right with the Duke, who thought the others didn't care about her at all. The girl felt a wave of disapproval and concern wash over her. Kiana explained that she was a one-woman team, so it was impossible to take a break. But even so, the dean and professors always wanted to keep her around. She wanted to prove she was worthy of being there, so she had no choice. To become a professor, she had to meet the publication quota, but no matter how brilliant a student she was still an outsider. Duke Scary suddenly realized he had overlooked something important about his granddaughter. He hadn't wanted her to be in this situation, but he hadn't been paying close enough attention. He was angry that the academy dared to treat her that way. Just then, Joshua was confused as to why his sister would sacrifice herself for some academy. I mean, she hadn't contacted them for 6 whole years, not even for her graduation. He couldn't understand why Kiana would miss her family for this, admitting they had been sending her letters, but only occasionally received some vague replies. It was then that Kiana realized something was seriously wrong with the letters, as she had indeed replied to theirs, and had even invited them to her graduation ceremony. Everyone began to realize that someone had been deliberately intercepting their mail, but it was unclear who would do such a thing and why. It turned out that Howl was behind all of this, hoping they would solve their family problems on their own. Shortly after, a servant brought all the letters they had exchanged with the academy. In the letters she read, Kiana found descriptions of her school life, and among them was a request for her not to attend her own graduation ceremony. She remembered how the professors had told her to forget her family, focus on her research, and praised her talent. Now Joshua understood everything, thinking those people were complete perverts who had destroyed their family. But then Howl added that the family had already fallen apart long ago. No one just wanted to admit it. This was indeed true, but the Duke simply ignored it. Joshua started shouting that the academy would pay for this. The old man agreed and decided to send Alex to deal with them. Kiana grew worried, feeling sorry for the academy where she had achieved so much. but then she noticed her brother's disapproving gaze. She told him to forget her momentary pity, saying it wasn't like her at all. Joshua then proudly declared that he was completely done with that academy. He was just glad that his older brother, Alex, the guy he considered a total loose cannon, was far away because that guy had sworn to shave Joshua's head if he ever dared to set foot in the house. Joshua just told his sister to wait until their brother took care of everything. She began to plead with her grandfather, making sure Alex wouldn't harm the innocent students and not to destroy the system, as there was still work to be done on it. The old man promised they would only go after the higher-ups, and just then, Piaggi returned. Duke Scary and Joshua found it strange to see the creature land on Kiana's head, while she was happy he had returned early, even though it was the first time. When he was with Melissa, these errands always took about a week. Kiana explained that her sister had given Piaggi to her because she had joined a convent. She even said she didn't want him, and Piaggi suddenly became upset, as she had always tried to snatch him away before. Now he felt she was an even more cold and heartless woman. With that, he flew off. A moment of silence fell between them. Then Duke Scary calmly suggested his granddaughter go after the bird, and advised her to comfort him after hurting him with her thoughtless words. After all, summoned creatures were very emotional and dependent on their masters. He also told her not to fixate on the idea that they were just following orders. He realized Kiana cared about his opinion on summoned creatures. He reminded her that the Freeli estate was no academy, so she shouldn't skip meals, and he forbade her from drinking any strange potions. He gave her his blessing and then told her to go get the little bird back. The girl felt a bit ashamed. This was the first time he had given her advice about a familiar. To show her gratitude, she promised to find and comfort the chick. She also decided to break him of his whining habit, as she was his true master now. On her way, she wondered if Piaggi had really delivered the letter that quickly. Meanwhile, in the royal palace of Tylus, in Prince Heaton's study, a servant suddenly burst in before His Highness, completely terrified. The prince thought they were preparing for guests, as the emperor was ill. But Rodrigo told him to listen about Kiana Freeli. He claimed she had changed a lot since she used to chase after him. Now he was asking the prince to pressure the duke so that he could marry the princess. He believed Miss Freeli was the best candidate for his marriage. Rodrigo even reminded the prince of everything he had done for him and asked for his help. Heaton reminded him that he was not the crown prince and didn't have that kind of power. He thought his brother was still alive, but Rodrigo said he was the one who pushed him off the cliff. The emperor had been bedridden for 7 years. Since the prince's disappearance, the third empress, Dolores, had been in seclusion. The daughter of the late fifth empress, Colette, posed no threat to the succession. This meant Heaton had a high chance of becoming the next emperor. Those guys his age with blue eyes, they had already been dealt with. Besides, blue eyes were very rare, so Heaton wasn't too worried. Rodrigo was handling that matter, and the prince agreed to help him with Kiana. He promised to write a letter to the duke for Rodrigo to take, but he was angry at his aide for bringing up that whole affair again and threatened to deal with him, just as he had with Freeli. Meanwhile, Kiana went to Piaggi's room, where he was sulking like a small child. He complained that if it weren't for the Freeli family, he would be in great pain, just like how Miss Kiana felt when she went to the academy. The girl lay down on the bed, next to the little bird, and told him to stop sobbing. Even she wasn't sure if she should be here right now. After all, in the original story, her family hadn't thought of her at all when she left. Just then, Kiana noticed Piaggi was only fake crying, but she said nothing. He declared that not only did they not miss her, they barely even spoke to each other. This place had been a mess from the start, and Kiana couldn't argue with that. She suddenly wondered if the chick missed Melissa and if he held a grudge against her for abandoning him to run off to a convent. Piaggi wasn't angry, because Kiana was trying to save the family, and he was happy to help, while Melissa was with those volunteers trying to save all the poor people in the world. Melissa's memories were filled with love and kindness. She always smiled at everyone, and even the grumpiest family members always welcomed her. Piaggi now expected to be used by Kiana, but he felt invigorated. It had become easier for him to transport items, and he finished much faster too. Kiana was glad her pep talk had worked, and the little bird had forgotten why he was sulking. But she realized that she could now train Piaggi to carry heavier things, and she could also train him to be more efficient. Piaggi was also happy that Kiana hadn't run away like Melissa, but was standing strong here. After all, she faced many challenges here but she persevered. The girl just explained how it worked, explaining in scientific terms. Piaggi once again wished that magic engineering would just fail completely. Early in the morning, a maid burst in to say the Duke had sent a proposal. Still half asleep, she just wanted to know if Prince Heaton's opinion had been considered. I mean, the only thing above the Freelie family was the damn royal family. Kiana didn't expect Rodrigo to move so fast. In the original story, he had pulled this trick on Melissa too, but the prince was not happy that someone was trying to take his buddy's woman. But now Heaton didn't even know what Kiana looked like, so he signed the order without a second thought. Kiana could only refuse the order by claiming she was already engaged. However, if she did that, the royal family would try to break them up. But Kiana didn't have a man, and if her grandfather didn't agree, it would all be for nothing. So the girl still didn't want to marry Rodrigo, but she decided to apologize for being so harsh to him yesterday. That's why she told the maid to get her ready for the meeting quickly. Kiana decided to take this matter directly to Grandpa Scary. Joshua found out about Rodrigo's marriage proposal. He was not happy, more like furious, thinking that Duke's son was a complete madman. Even so, he had already sent a letter to Duke Freelie, asking them to seal the deal with a marriage. Joshua, worried about his sister, immediately rushed to his closet to pick an outfit, but whatever he chose didn't seem right for the occasion. As much as he didn't want to, he would have to go meet his future brother-in-law. His aide even grew worried seeing him get ready so quickly. Joshua needed to get to the Duke's estate as soon as possible. There were rumors that the Freelie family had marriage problems, like Alex, who was dumped the very next day. Melissa had joined a convent, so marriage was out of the question. That only left Kiana, who was famous for being very difficult. So Rodrigo should be grateful for even having a chance. But the way he and Prince Heaton were acting was really getting on Joshua's nerves. He couldn't shake the memory of a family being torn apart by a runaway bride, just like what happened with his parents, and he didn't want the same thing to happen to his sister. That's why he was already plotting how to ruin the marriage. Meanwhile, Kiana went to her grandfather and announced that she wasn't interested in getting married, and she had a reason that not even the prince could easily ignore. Seeing her grandfather get worked up, she assured him that she had thought it through. But he explained that she didn't need a big reason to ask for something. She could just say she didn't want to marry that bastard. It was as simple as that. Scary also told his granddaughter to just say what she wants from now on. He wasn't going to let an engagement happen just because Kiana hadn't become a nun, unlike Melissa, who would cause a commotion throughout the kingdom. In the end, the old man told Kiana to just ignore the letter, because even her marriage wouldn't be enough to maintain our friendly relations with the royal family. Scary finally noticed Joshua had shown up too, but his matter sort of resolved itself after that. The guy felt he had heard enough and decided to slip away. But when he got to the hallway, he couldn't find a single servant. They had all disappeared, so he started complaining that no one was there to see him off. Hey, he was royalty. Just as his complaining reached its peak, Kiana yanked the door open. Joshua thought she was finally going to do the right thing and escort him out, but the girl just told him to shut up and announced she was going to practice. Joshua took her practice as her way of seeing her brother off to the carriage, and on the way, he even teased her to breathe evenly and maintain a steady pace. Soon, Joshua was settled in the carriage with his pet snake, which he never left behind, but Kiana didn't seem to care at all. What bothered him now was that all the servants were staring at him. It was because of his shouting, but even so, Kiana felt she could be friends with him. She also thought that if the whole family had stuck together, her life would have been very different. That's why she had to make an effort to work with them. She reminded her brother to ask around about the crown prince. Joshua was silent for a moment, then promised he would do everything he could. What also bothered both him and Kiana was Howl, and when Howl had been injured and poisoned. But it was unlikely their grandfather would tell him anything about it. She asked her brother to find out when Howl had first started to get weak, and also to find someone for her in the capital, which he was more than capable of doing. That person was Marquis Caesar Levine. Joshua got angry hearing the name. He knew he was real trouble and didn't understand why Kiana needed him. Meanwhile, at the Marquis' estate, Caesar was getting ready for a walk in the capital. His aide was a bit surprised, but guessed it was urgent, though the Marquis insisted it was purely business. The aide still thought he was overdoing it a bit, but the Marquis was going to get both things done regardless. He had already planned everything. Now, it was just a matter of time, and that was all. Before this, Caesar Levine had donated a large amount of cash for research. He seemed to be specifically targeting Kiana, as she was the top professor in the field of magical tool development. So she was considering proposing a deal to him, a fake relationship. After all, He wasn't usually interested in women, and especially not Melissa. Kiana didn't know what he looked like yet, but she thought he was the perfect candidate. She had heard the previous Marquis died at 60, and Joshua knew that someone had saved the Marquis's life during an attack on the Levine territory. He also eliminated all the enemies and had them demoted to commoners, and the Marquis adopted the young man. Kiana was surprised that even though he had only moved to the capital a year ago, he spent money like a real big shot. But no one knew why he came, as he wasn't much of a socializer. Then Kiana wondered how Joshua knew Caesar was big trouble. It turned out he had an elegant air, even without designer clothes, which annoyed Joshua. The girl realized Caesar was handsome, but there was always something off about him. Anyway, she had them find him and notify her as soon as possible. All this time, she was trying to figure out how to calm her brother down so he wouldn't worry himself sick over her. Kiana wanted to tell him to back off a little, and stay out of her business. But Joshua's carriage was already far away. Later, Kiana was fuming because the maid wouldn't let her have any energy drinks, only healthy food, and the coffee she brought was a drop in the bucket. But this was on Dr. Kalen's advice, as he had been looking after Kiana since she was a child. Then the maid handed the young lady a letter from Lord Joshua. He wrote that he had found Marquis Caesar Levine, who was currently hanging out at some disreputable establishment. My brother also told Kiana to stay away from such shady places and see the Marquis later. But instead, she started racking her brain, trying to remember where that club was. Then, she quickly scribbled a letter and started to get ready. She had the maid send the envelope and then come with her. She also told her to dress herself up nicely, as she was going to a den of iniquity. The Marquis and his aide were gloomily passing the time in the club. They were wearing masks to hide their identities and discussing their plan. Caesar spotted the person he had been tracking from a distance. At one of the tables was Orcus Eddies, a former imperial knight and the princess's fencing instructor. He was also part of that ill-fated journey when the crown prince went missing. The Marquis was surprised that the penniless Orcus would be hanging out in a place like this. Just then, a girl with long pink hair and a mask walked past them. It was Kiana, with her maid following close behind. The Marquis's aide recognized Miss Kiana and was completely stunned. Then they saw her playing blackjack at a private table. The goal of the game was to get a total as close to 21 as possible. After just one round, they handed her a pile of chips. The other players at the table were shocked that she would bet so much right off the bat. Anyway, the game continued, and even people at the next table started to notice Kiana. Piaggi was with her, but he was pretending to be a doll to avoid any awkward questions. The Marquis's aide thought she was crazy, as if she didn't know the first thing about cards. Then one of the players decided to show his cards first. But the girl had exactly 20, and she won. Kiana looked around, just smiled mysteriously, and then she had her maid collect the chips, ready to leave. But then Orcus slammed the table, startled, and accused her of cheating. He couldn't believe a girl could just win like that. Kiana glared at him. She really wanted to smack him on the head, but she just smiled and said that with her chips clinking, she could barely hear what he was saying. The loser started shouting about just how important he was. He grabbed her wrist, but she was clearly trying to start something. She believed the right person would show up because of it. Then the young man intervened, crushing Eddie's hand and stopping him quickly. He introduced himself as the club owner and promised to handle things. Usually, the owner only showed up when there was a real problem. Now he claimed he hadn't seen the lady cheat in any way. She was just lucky. The casino had suffered a huge loss because of it, but the owner was understanding. Suddenly, Piaggi snapped out of it and lunged at the man. He ripped off the mask that covered his entire face. The guy looked like Joshua, so Kiana gave the bird a signal. But now you could see the face was different, and that blonde hair wasn't real. More importantly, this guy turned out to be the criminal, Alvin Khalif, and someone immediately shouted for the guards to get him. A group of men in uniform rushed over and pinned him to the ground. They tied his hands to make sure this extremely dangerous criminal wouldn't escape. This was one of the traps Heaton had specifically set for the Free Life family. The prince believed Joshua was the owner and wanted to raise funds for a rebellion, but the real owner was Alvin, whom Heaton had been backing. Joshua knew someone was impersonating him, but he was actually quite amused by it. So now if the club was shut down, Joshua wouldn't get into any trouble. Kiana breathed a sigh of relief that this mess might be over, but it wasn't. This scumbag had already bribed some of the guards so that he could escape. But Miss Freeli decided to play along and get him to confess everything himself. She loudly told her maid to go cash in her chips now, because this place was about to go under. The maid went to carry out the order without a word. Just then, Heaton Rashani walked up to Kiana and thanked her for helping to catch the criminal. He was the second son of the Rashani family and the commander of the capital's 5th Guard. He was also the one who had received Kiana's letter before coming here. In the letter, she had advised him to lie in wait to catch Alvin Khalif. She was betting that the name Alvin would get Rashini's attention. A while ago, Khalif had murdered the Duchess of Rashini and fled with her family's heirloom. Heaton swore to catch him and joined the city guard. A nobleman joining the guard was a really eye-catching affair, showing just how much of a grudge Heaton held against Alvin. But if he found out the prince was backing this fraud, all hell would break loose. That's why Kiana stated flatly that someone must be backing Alvin. To prevent the prince from interfering, she asked the Rashini family to conduct the investigation. The guard commander agreed, but told the lady to get out of here, saying the place gave him the creeps and he was shutting it down. Originally, Heaton had a crush on Melissa, but couldn't show it due to his duties. So now not only had they never met, but neither of them would be getting married. Kiana went on to say that she was waiting for her maid, who had gone to exchange some cash. It was money she had won fair and square, and she wanted to get her hands on it before the staff pocketed it. She made it clear she hadn't cheated, just used her damn brain. She explained how she had calculated what cards everyone was likely to get. To do that, you had to be very good at math. Kiana knew this kind of conversation usually made people want to bolt, and Heaton bluntly admitted that math wasn't his strong suit. Then she explained that Alvin used lucky winners as bait to attract more players, as novices also relied on luck and threw their money down. Just then, Kiana noticed Heaton was looking at her a little too intently, and he admitted he had heard the rumors about her abusing her cousin. So he had always thought of her as a suspicious character. But Kiana just confirmed the rumors flatly. Then she turned and asked the captain to continue his investigation. But he didn't want to leave her alone, didn't want her to become the talk of the town. This annoyed Kiana a bit, and she even considered bringing up math again. But for now, she just firmly told Heaton to go back to what he was supposed to be doing. Just then, another handsome young man walked up to them. He introduced himself as Caesar Levine and offered to escort Kiana to a safe place. Heaton had heard about Caesar and was glad to finally meet him. Kiana remembered seeing this handsome guy at the shop earlier. She couldn't believe he was the Caesar Levine she had been looking for. This was the guy who convinced the captain that he knew Miss Kiana and that everything was fine. To be sure, Heaton asked her to confirm what the gentleman said. The girl saw an opportunity to get to know the handsome Marquis better, while the captain wouldn't let up, asking for permission to visit her at her home later. But Kiana refused him, saying she didn't want any unnecessary meetings. However, she did agree to his request to express his gratitude for her service. After all, he had almost let a criminal slip away unnoticed. Kiana told him to act when she told him what to do. As the girl waved goodbye, Heaton noticed the bruise on her. He immediately grew concerned and told her to apply some ointment as soon as possible. While she was doing so, he skillfully wrapped her wrist with his handkerchief. Kiana realized Alvin must have somehow scratched her, and she was furious. The captain, after asking the Marquis to take care of the lady, began to take his leave. Just then, the girl heard her maid's cheerful voice as she ran towards her with 2 large bags of cash, having exchanged all the chips. Seeing all the gold coins she had won, Kiana couldn't stop smiling. She hugged her maid, thanking her for getting everything done before they closed. She hugged her so tightly that she almost squashed Piaggi, who happened to be between them. The Marquis interrupted them, saying it was time for them to go. He warned that he wouldn't take no for an answer, as it was too dangerous for a lady to be here alone. Kiana glanced at the hand Caesar extended like a perfect gentleman. Since she had other plans for this man, she politely placed her hand in his. Caesar's face instantly bloomed into a smile, as if his greatest dream had just come true. The girl, wondering how best to start the conversation, immediately asked him why he would approach her in a place like this. He confessed that he wanted to make a good impression because he had a favor to ask of the lady. Kiana began to suspect he wanted to order some magical items. After all, he was always sending requests to the academy, and now he had a chance to ask directly. She could guess because she had seen his name everywhere. So she couldn't say he was a complete stranger either. The Marquis was pleased with this honesty and praised her talent. Meanwhile, Caesar acted so calmly that he certainly would have noticed Melissa otherwise. But all he cared about was developing magical tools. Using this as an opening, Kiana asked the Marquis to start a relationship with her. Her proposal was so sudden that Caesar tripped on the stairs and nearly fell, but he steadied himself. Kiana worried that her idea had terrified him. Then Piaggi chimed in that dating was a great move, but Kiana, not wanting to lose her candidate, clarified that it would be a business partnership. So she began to plead with the Marquis to pretend they were dating, and her pitiful appearance made even Piaggi start to scold her. But then Caesar shouted for them both to shut up. His roar was so sharp that the lady with the bird was startled but closed her mouth. Caesar suggested they go to his estate to talk calmly. They went to his mansion, where the Marquis treated Kiana to coffee and cookies. He didn't eat anything himself, as he had lost his sense of taste after the accident. Then, the girl apologized for scaring him earlier with her request. She hadn't meant to drop the bombshell on him without any warning. The Marquis was curious why she had thought of it in the first place. He thought she was just charmed by his sudden appearance. But Kiana found it strange that a man with such a tragic life would be hanging out in a club, and she didn't think he was someone to be taken seriously at the time. Both the Marquis' servant and Kiana's maid couldn't help but let out a laugh. Even Piaggi was bent over with laughter and teased Caesar. His laughter was so over the top that Kiana was embarrassed by his behavior. She didn't think she was a good mentor, but a Marquis who went to clubs wasn't much better. He admitted it was his first time out and that he had business to attend to now. He had no reason to go back there, especially since the club had been shut down. Kiana decided not to press for details, as she just wanted to make him a business proposal. She smiled slightly, and the Marquis showered her with compliments, but she suddenly became flustered. I mean, this was only their second meeting. She noticed how gentle and ardent his gaze was. She didn't even realize she had started fantasizing about them actually going on a date. She wanted to feel love once, just like Melissa, but she changed the subject, mentioning Rodrigo, the man they saw at the shop. Kiana explained that he wanted to marry her and had the prince backing him, but she wasn't interested in him, which was why she was looking for a way out. Caesar guessed it was Heaton who was pressuring her family, but he didn't know why. She went on to say that Rodrigo had always been close to the prince. One had to survive in this world, just like that missing prince. So to get rid of her suitor, Kiana pleaded with the Marquis for help. She again asked him to pretend they were a couple, as not even the royal family could forcibly separate people in love. In exchange, she promised to help Caesar with his magical research and guaranteed a clean break without any trouble when the time came. But she worried that their fake relationship might become real. After hearing Kiana out, the Marquis smiled mysteriously and said he usually disdained using underhanded methods. But he had changed a lot in the past few years, and he agreed to the deal, hoping that Miss Fraley wouldn't regret it. They shook hands to seal the deal. Caesar added that there was no turning back now, not even if she changed her mind tomorrow. The girl didn't quite understand what he meant, but she agreed. He added that he was just reminding her out of courtesy. Then Kiana found out he didn't have any friends, which was something they had in common. To commemorate the deal, the lady decided to make one more request of the Marquis. She turned to a maid and asked for a small bag of gold coins. Kiana wanted to use the money to set up a lab for her here, because it would be a hassle to go back to her estate and build another one, where her grandfather wouldn't even let her drink coffee, which she had gotten used to for staying energized. Caesar offered to build the lab himself, but she refused. Kiana was worried he would hang out at clubs and squander his fortune, which was the reason. She couldn't fully trust his financial responsibility, so the Marquis told her to write down everything she needed, and he would take care of the rest. The girl was very excited, and they could finally make their relationship public. Then she asked what kind of magical tool the Marquis wanted, and Caesar declared he needed an artifact that could change eye color. Kiana immediately pointed out that such an item would cause pain and wondered why he would want something like that. But she then remembered that when someone places an order, you're not supposed to ask why. So she decided to just focus on the research and stop asking so many questions. The Marquis explained that everything else was easy to change, except for the eyes. Suddenly, Kiana remembered how the last research project had ended. She figured that if the Marquis knew about this tool, then surely others had tried to create it as well. Just then, Caesar confessed that he had been abandoned and no longer trusted anyone. He was just a child back then, but now he was a completely different person. The world that was once bright and comfortable for him had become incredibly dark. He didn't trust anyone, not even his own family. But he was sure he wasn't the only one, so Kiana didn't have to worry. The words about unreliable blood ties made the girl recall as if her family had also gone through something bad. They had abandoned her. But now she wondered if the Marquis didn't trust her either. Caesar admitted it, hoping she wouldn't take it the wrong way. The thing was, he didn't trust anyone, not his family, not even his first love. But he trusted Kiana's skills, so he was betting they would get along just fine. She wasn't going to argue with that, as she had indeed desperately honed her talents. She agreed to the Marquis' terms, but she had a condition of her own. Kiana wanted to delay publishing the paper on the development of the magical tool. She was worried that the child who might be the prince would end up in real trouble. This way she could buy him a little extra time. Caesar agreed to her condition and reminded her again that now there was no turning back, even if Kiana wanted to. She even suggested spreading rumors about them at the Heaton festival next week. It would be easy since they would be together, showing everyone they were a couple. The Marquis was already planning to go. He just didn't have a partner. Kiana, suddenly worried she might ruin his high society debut, but she still agreed to go to the ceremony with him and then started to say her goodbyes. As she was about to go upstairs, the Marquis stopped her, hooking his finger around the scarf on her wrist. The scarf quickly came loose and fell at her feet. Kiana turned around, not quite understanding what else the Marquis wanted. Caesar stated bluntly that he couldn't let his woman leave wearing another man's handkerchief. He then took out his own handkerchief and tied it around her sprained wrist. He didn't give her any medicine because, hey, what's borrowed must be returned, right? The girl got the hint. It was his way of creating an opportunity for their next romantic encounter. Kiana was lost in thought, as she wasn't a big fan of returning gifts anyway. She bid the Marquis farewell and called for her maid by the carriage. She slipped her a few gold coins as a reward for her hard work and endurance. She knew nothing motivated people like a little money, and the maid was overjoyed. Before they knew it, they were back at the Fraley estate. On the way, Piaggi was thinking about how much fun it would be to watch this drama unfold. Miss Fraley reminded him that it was time for her little bird to get to work. There should already be a reply waiting in the mailbox. But since they returned earlier than expected, she decided to let Piaggi rest. Piaggi suddenly started complaining about not wanting to work and move things. He was also worried that Kiana and Caesar would fall in love while he was away. So the girl started teasing him, saying she'd just have to have some fun on her own then. Then she told Piaggi that if he wanted to see how it all played out, he'd have to work fast. The familiar was still unhappy and called her a real piece of work again. But the lady started lecturing him with a bunch of physics nonsense. Piaggi could only make a face as he had to listen to all of it. Meanwhile, the Marquis went out onto the balcony. Getting some fresh air, he ordered his assistant to dispose of the clothes he had worn today. Glancing at the handkerchief again, he asked for it to be sent to Viscount Aubien, with a note saying it was returned from the Marquis of Levine's territory. Soon, Piaggi, who teleported items through an unseen dimension, set off to deliver another letter, even though he really wanted to watch Kiana's drama. She was the complete opposite of the kind and witty Melissa. After working for Melissa, Piaggi often slacked off. With Kiana, he had to work harder, but his abilities had also grown stronger. Suddenly, he realized he had been putting in effort without knowing it, which was why he was working faster. Piaggi started to worry, because Kiana could push him to work even harder that way. The letter he was delivering was to thank Kiana for saving someone's life. Back at the Fraley estate, it was chaos. Miss Kiana was getting dressed with the help of her maids as usual. Joshua had shown up again while Alex was away. Also, the capital was in an uproar because the crown prince had tried to take out his mentor. At the club, Kiana suddenly realized this was happening way too far ahead of schedule, so she went to find her brother to get the details from him. In the living room, besides Joshua, was the fearsome Duke, who asked Kiana if she had eaten breakfast. She had come straight over as soon as she woke up, so she hadn't eaten. This annoyed the old man, who ordered her to eat right here, right now. The girl suddenly became anxious seeing them force so much food on her. The table was piled with everything from chicken to dessert, and Kiana couldn't imagine how she could eat it all. Grandpa suggested she start with some hot soup to warm her stomach, while Joshua decided to help cut her meat, thinking she looked super fragile. The girl started complaining to everyone that she wasn't sick and that a cup of coffee in the morning was enough for her. As she tried to prove she was perfectly healthy, Joshua handed her a mirror, telling her to take a good look at her complexion and the dark circles under her eyes. Then Scary ordered the maids to get rid of all the junk food in the estate. Kiana agreed to eat, but not as much as they wanted her to. Her grandfather and brother watched as she gulped down the soup. The old man promised to make sure she ate well for the next 60 years. Joshua wanted to shut down the research lab so his sister could get some proper rest. When Kiana finished what was on her plate, Scary thanked her for saving him. He hadn't had a chance earlier because he was busy with academy matters. Then he told Joshua to leave, which left the guy completely clueless. The old man told him to get lost so he could thank his granddaughter for her help. Joshua suddenly remembered his sister had helped catch a criminal yesterday, the guy who was imitating his style at the casino. She noted that the guy wasn't as similar as she thought. She had only found out he was a bad guy by pure chance while wandering around the Duchy of Reloni. She told a lie, thinking Alex would clean up the academy's mess anyway, and no one would find out. Joshua was more concerned that a blonde, masked crown prince had appeared at the club that night. He pointed out that Orca Seeds had been the prince's fencing instructor, and he was with his highness during that picnic when the prince fell off a cliff. After the prince went missing, Orca retired from the knighthood out of guilt. But yesterday, Seeds claimed the crown prince appeared and tried to take him out. The culprit ended up surviving, but his wrist was completely torn up. Joshua also remembered that Kiana's wrist was injured too. He was worried her delicate hands could get hurt easily and told her to be careful. She herself remembered that no one had seen anyone who even slightly resembled the prince. Besides, she didn't understand why he would try to take out his former mentor, even if he had returned. The girl noticed her grandfather sipping his tea thoughtfully, while her brother just stared blankly into the distance, as if searching for brain cells. They were playing dumb, but they were all thinking the same thing. Prince Heaton had the most to gain from the crown prince's disappearance. His Highness Heaton's inner circle probably did the dirty deed. After Orca claimed he was being harassed, the prince summoned him. Kiana realized that leaving the letter in the secret compartment had changed the crown prince's future and the entire story. Now he was alive and planning his revenge. Any prince in his position would have let Orca rot in his madness to make an example of him. But this was all happening much faster than Kiana had anticipated. She wouldn't be able to figure things out until Piaggi brought back an answer. She disagreed with her brother's idea that it was none of their business. Heaton would be too busy to bother with the Fraley family or his marriage to Rodrigo now, but Kiana didn't care, because she had already found herself a boyfriend. At this confession, her grandfather nearly choked on his tea. Just like Joshua, they were both completely caught off guard by this. They immediately surrounded Kiana, grilling her about who this man was and where he came from. My brother even thought it was Abian Rashini, the one who hit on her at the club. He really disliked the guy and swore to beat him to a pulp. And Scary couldn't believe someone had dared to make a move on his granddaughter. So Kiana explained the real situation, saying no one was harassing anyone and that Abian was the captain of the guard. He wasn't even allowed to get married. Anyway, her relatives preferred Rashini far more than Rodrigo, the second son of the Rashini family. Everyone thought he was a saint since he was a child. Kiana thought he was a dork, but now she understood why Melissa would have liked him. Eventually, though, she confessed that her fiancé was Marquis Caesar Levine. Joshua went on a tirade about him, saying the guy was just a freeloader who hung out at clubs. Scary thought he was a swindler and couldn't believe his granddaughter was dating him. Then Kiana confessed it was a fake relationship, and her brother changed his tune. He had a title, after all, and Kiana could use that. But Joshua wanted to confirm it was just a contract and that his sister wouldn't fall for the Marquis, and that she wouldn't abandon her plan if Caesar suddenly got involved with someone else. Kiana even thought her brother had been binging on romance novels. Knowing he was writing an article, she told him to keep it very brief. If she had known the prince would show up, she wouldn't have rushed to propose to Caesar yesterday. Just then, the butler knocked anxiously on the door. He entered the room and reported important news to his master. His Majesty the Emperor was on his way to the Fraley territory. This was unexpected, and only Kiana suspected the reason for his visit. The Emperor only came to them when he had a major request. After all, the Fraley family had always been the royal family's most loyal and reliable servants. When the Emperor made a request of them, all family members would gather to choose the appropriate summon. Kiana didn't want to stay for the meeting and was about to slip away, but her grandfather stopped her and demanded her presence. Now she had no choice, as she had a summon of her own. She had a feeling she knew what this was about, even though this meeting was supposed to happen much later. When the Emperor walked in, she greeted him politely. His Majesty had heard she had recently returned from the academy. He immediately noticed a family member was missing, and Scary explained that Alex was absent, but his other descendants were present. Then, following the blood pact, he asked the reason for the visit. The blood pact was an oath of loyalty sworn by the first head of the Fraley family. This was why the family held discussions to decide which summon to use. It was also why the entire Fraley family lived in the capital instead of the duchy. If the direct descendants couldn't decide, members of the branch families would be summoned. Scary was quick to remind everyone that he had served the royal family before, and that he was ready to continue serving His Majesty and the Empire. The Emperor suddenly coughed, admitting he was very ill. Even with treatment, he would be bettered again after he returned, fighting the illness for months. But now he wanted to discuss Orca's claim that he saw Ed. Ed was the nickname for the missing crown prince, Edmund. The investigation revealed that Orca was drunk and had been hallucinating. However, the Emperor wasn't here to dwell on those details. He had a small favor to ask of the Fraley family regarding the missing prince. He asked for help to personally reach the Tree of Telly so he could pray. The tree grew on the burial site of the first emperor, and it preferred gems over water. When faced with difficulties, emperors would offer it jewels and pray. The gems had to be large because the first emperor was very fond of flashy things. Animals also couldn't get near the tree because the first emperor only liked humans. Now the emperor wanted to offer the largest gem at the very top of the tree, but summoned creatures wouldn't work as they were basically animals. Plus, Kiana wasn't even sure if Piaggi was completely under her control. Remembering how the emperor was powerless to stop her family's arrest due to his illness, she began to wonder if she should even bother with this. Especially since in the original story, this request was never fulfilled. Her gaze shifted to her grandfather, who looked exhausted. Then Kiana stole a glance at her brother Joshua, who, for his part, seemed very interested in this. It was pathetic to see Scary still clinging to his family status. I mean, he looked drained and lost in his own thoughts. So Kiana suggested the emperor tie the gem to an arrow and shoot it. His Majesty had considered it, but a stone arrow would be too heavy. After a moment of thought, the girl offered to solve the problem herself. Her relatives fell silent, and the emperor gave Kiana a sharp look. To him, it seemed the lady had not yet fully mastered the Fraley family's special ability. All the girl did was thank him for not kicking her out, since she might not be a real Fraley. And for the emperor, even answering a foolish question from a useless lady. After all, he didn't say she couldn't summon a creature, just that she hadn't unlocked the ability yet. Kiana expressed her gratitude, but the emperor felt as if he had been slapped. Just then, Scary cut in, asking how she planned to solve this. He assured the emperor that the child could be fully trusted, but the way he spoke sounded like he was bragging about his own granddaughter. Kiana announced that she would have everything ready in time for the emperor to travel to the tree. All she asked for was a guard skill with a bow. Soon, they all arrived at the royal courtyard. Kiana was thrilled. It was her first time seeing the tree up close, and it was so huge you couldn't even see the top. The girl then asked His Majesty to wait a moment, and she began to take out all the things she had specifically bought at the shop. She was so excited that she had stuffed all sorts of gadgets in there. Plus, she was thrilled that His Majesty still supported the prince. Soon, she had created a magic stone that could heat up quickly and a laser stone that she planned to hide in the hot air balloons basket. Without batting an eye, His Majesty handed over the gem. The stone was slippery, so Kiana decided to wrap it in paper so that it wouldn't fall out. She used a piece of paper with notes on it and tied everything together with a string to secure it. The magical device began to heat up and the balloon started to rise. Now, once it got high enough, the archer would shoot the balloon so the Eliza gem would fall onto the branches. Kiana was thinking that a larger version of this could even carry people. The emperor was very impressed, and the girl explained how it worked. When the air is heated, the balloon expands and becomes lighter than air. That's why it could float so easily. Then Kiana got carried away and started talking about buoyancy and equations, and the laws of fluid dynamics that air follows. But as soon as she started explaining, everyone's faces went blank. Kiana didn't even notice she could go on and on about science forever. She had always dreamed of having an audience that couldn't escape her lectures. Soon, the hot air balloon was high enough. The archer immediately shot an arrow, which cut through the string. The Eliza gem rolled out of its wrapping and fell into the branches. His Majesty was glad they had managed to retrieve the gem. He promised to reward Miss Kiana handsomely after he prayed. While he was busy, she was free to continue chatting with his guards. They were just praying this whole thing would be over soon. His Majesty approached the tree and silently pressed his palm against it. His eyes were filled with hope and sorrow as he prayed. The knights would rather die than listen to Kiana's lecture. They bolted as soon as they saw the Emperor returning, chattering about how worried they were because it felt like an eternity. He only hoped for a miracle to bring the prince back to them. Then he turned to Miss Kiana and thanked her for her help with the gem. You have to understand, he was a father, you know. He couldn't give up hope, even if it wasn't logical. Even though it kept hurting him, the Emperor still believed. Kiana was willing to believe too, and she supported His Majesty. But she was curious what the reason was that the prince couldn't return. He sighed heavily and admitted there was indeed a reason. The rumor that the royal family was immune to poison suggested they were blessed by the gods. Now the Emperor was convinced that Kiana possessed a special power. The girl confessed she couldn't summon her familiar, but she had come to terms with it. Besides, she did get a familiar, even if it wasn't the one she wanted. She also believed the crown prince would answer the Emperor's prayers. His Majesty was deeply moved by her words, and he asked Kiana to be his daughter-in-law, adding that Edmund would be very handsome if he just lost a little weight. Suddenly, Kiana flashed back to when she was 15. Instead of playing the damn piano, she had thrown the sheet music at Melissa. Everyone rushed to Melissa, but Edmund walked over to Kiana and asked her what was wrong. She was so ashamed in front of him that she ran away on the spot. She usually avoided the crown prince and never thought of becoming the crown princess. So now she confesses to the Emperor that she already has someone in her heart. But the Emperor doesn't see it as a problem, because if the relationship isn't deep, that person can be easily taken care of. He doesn't know who the person is, but advises her not to rush into marriage. Then, the Emperor remembers Kiana's other name, Ellie, which means the most precious gem. If Edmund were to return, she and he would be a match made in heaven. Then, His Majesty reaches out from under his fur cloak. He takes out a piece of paper, a gift of gratitude. The document grants Kiana the right to meet with members of the royal family at any time. If the Emperor himself is unavailable, the Empress will also see her when she is free. The girl politely thanks His Majesty for the generous gift. He says goodbye, hoping to see her familiar next time. Kiana thinks to herself that if someone said they had seen the crown prince, the Emperor would be overjoyed, even if it was 6 years ago and Edmund was solely focused on revenge. Despite this, Kiana can't reveal any definite news to the palace. Besides, the crown prince probably won't return until the real culprit is found. However, once he does return, it would be wise to use his power to launch an investigation. The only thing clear for now is that he is targeting Heaton. Kiana decides to help him and pave the way, especially since it's her own path to survival. Kiana tells her maid to prepare for a walk tomorrow. As for her attire, she asks for a kerchief and a maid's uniform. But she reminds the maid that the kerchief must have a checkered pattern. As night falls on the palace, Prince Heaton comes to the garden and walks towards a tree. He heard that the Emperor had prayed here with Lady Kiana. The prince doesn't believe in such hocus-pocus, and it irritates him greatly. He takes out a small gem and throws it at the tree. The stone hits the trunk and seems to disappear into it instantly. Heaton hopes that Crown Prince Edmund is already dead, or at least never returns. But just then, a gentle breeze rustles the leaves, and a piece of paper lands right on Heaton's head. The prince guesses it's a note and gets excited, as there's a saying that the gods pass messages to the royal family on such slips of paper. So Heaton is very curious about what's written on it. Someone had written that they stand with the crown prince. Thinking the gods are supporting Edmund, Heaton flies into a rage and screams. Then he starts cursing the tree and vows to cut it down. For a while after that, the garden echoes with his screams and curses. The next morning, Kiana changes her clothes as planned and heads to town. She searches among the many stalls on the street for a specific one, where the retired high priest, Meyer Els, is located. He is very old and to be honest, doesn't look like a priest at all anymore. 20 years ago, the temple was shut down after its corruption was exposed. While the temple staff were lining their own pockets, Meer was busy drinking and noticed nothing. At this moment, the Marquis is observing him from around a corner, trying to figure out how to make him move. He's racking his brain, trying to get information about the last holy relic, and is about to lose his mind. Moreover, his assistant has noticed his desperation to break Kiana's engagement. Just then, a visitor appears in the former priest's tent. It's Lady Kiana, disguised as a common maid. But she's not here for a blessing, as she doesn't believe in superstitious nonsense. She sits down uninvited in a chair and admits she's here to talk. Moreover, she knows his true identity. Meer immediately tells her to get lost, seeing her as just another person who hates the temple. But there's nothing he can do about it. Kiana explains that she actually wants to show some goodwill to the gods. Then she gives her servant a signal to take the alcohol out of her bag. Within 2 seconds, a bottle of wine and 2 glasses appear on the table in front of the priest. The man is confused, but at the same time, a sudden urge to drink washes over him. The girl is excited. Her opening gambit was a success. She offers to be his drinking buddy, saying she can hold her liquor quite well. After all, she knows this priest used to drink and cause trouble in the temple. Meer figures there's no point in arguing, so he holds out his glass and praises her social skills. The cork pops out with a pop, followed by the gurgling sound of wine being poured. Without a moment's hesitation, the man downs it in one go. Then Kiana pours herself a glass and downs it too. They continue drinking like this until several bottles are empty. Meer's hands and feet start to get cold, but the girl seems completely fine. Now he needs some warm water, and Kiana is already prepared. She gives him a regular hot water bottle, as the Rama priests avoid magical devices. The priest holds the water bottle, feeling the warmth spread through his hands. He keeps drinking, and though the god's blessing keeps him from getting drunk, his limbs grow colder and colder. Kiana opens another bottle and asks him to have another glass. With every glass, they take turns making toasts. Soon, Meer starts to relax, acting like any ordinary person who's had a few drinks. He chatters on about his acolytes, while Kiana is reminded of her graduate students. Alice has been standing by, constantly refilling the table with bottles. Before long, Meer starts to feel drunk. Kiana tells her maid to wait outside, as she needs to talk to the priest. Without another word, she gets straight to the point. The girl turns to the man, whose face is flushed and who is drooling. Kiana demands that he tell her the hiding place of the temple's last holy relic. She doesn't raise her voice, but the Marquis still overhears their conversation. But Meer explains that he cannot reveal that information, even on pain of death. Kiana, however, declares that it is necessary for the crown prince. As she speaks, she pours him more wine, hoping to loosen his tongue. She continues to question him for about another hour, but he just keeps repeating that it's hidden in a safe place, and he can't say where. He can't drink anymore and begs her to let him be. But Kiana keeps pouring. Another hour passes, and the girl's cheeks are flushed from the alcohol, but she still demands an answer, just as before. Meer keeps saying he can't tell her, but when he can barely lift his head, he finally breaks and confesses everything. Kiana prepares to head to the location immediately, but just then, Meer reminds her that divine power has its own little secrets. Since he's had a good time drinking, he decides to tell her one of them. Then he admits that an ordinary priest can't possibly turn back time, not even with the help of divine power. After that, he starts to feel unwell and asks if they can talk another day. Kiana walks straight out, not satisfied with how things went. Meer senses another guest and says goodbye to him as well. The next moment, the Marquis, who had been hiding around the corner, leaves the area. Meanwhile, Kiana has only taken a few steps before she starts to feel dizzy. The maid grows worried for her, and she also feels like someone is watching them. She has no proof, just a feeling. Kiana tells her to go back to the carriage first. Alice insists that her feeling can't be wrong. Just then, a vendor at a nearby stall starts shouting, trying to attract people to buy scarves. He announces a 5-minute limited time sale, urging customers to hurry and grab them. Kiana immediately rushes over, want to buy a scarf for herself. Alice immediately grabs her to prevent her from getting into trouble, but worries she might accidentally bruise her lady's delicate hand. Overwhelmed, she lets go, and Kiana falls forward. Alice panics, but just then, the Marquis' assistant appears. He tells her not to worry, assuring her that the lady will be fine. The Marquis will take care of Kiana, and the assistant asks the maid to wait in the carriage. Knowing she would have questions, he explains that they are here on business. Alice starts to feel angry at the scarf vendor who shouted at such an inopportune moment. It was actually the Marquis who ordered it, but that's a secret. Meanwhile, Kiana gets caught in a stampede of people also chasing after the scarves. She even wonders if this is karma for, exerting too much influence on the priest. She's about to go buy a coffee when suddenly someone grabs her by the waist. She looks up and sees the Marquis, who tells her to stay with him until the sale is over. He also confesses he's here on business and just happened to see Kiana. But Caesar remains tight-lipped about what business he's actually on. Kiana guesses he might be a loan shark or something, which is why he won't say. Now she doesn't know what to make of him, whether he's a good person or bad news. I mean, if he's mixed up in that kind of thing, he's a scoundrel. Just then, the salesperson shouts that the sale is extended for 10 minutes. Not wanting to wait any longer, Kiana asks the Marquis to pick her up and push through the crowd. But the Marquis says he's not as strong as he looks, which makes her wonder how he ever won a war. Caesar claims it was all thanks to his brilliant strategies. But Kiana is disappointed, thinking he's a total weakling, muscles or not. She starts to lose consciousness, and Caesar takes her around a corner, away from the crowd. He helps her into a more comfortable position, saying they'll just stay there until the event is over. The girl leans on his shoulder, and the Marquis takes off her glasses so they don't dig into her. As he continuously whispers reassurances, Kiana gradually falls asleep. She dreams of a voice hissing about how much it hates the royal family, and how it's plotting to wipe them all out and seize the blood-soaked throne. After a while, Kiana opens her eyes to see the Marquis telling her to rest a little longer. She remembers trying to get the old man drunk and then starts to look around. They're still in the alley, and Caesar wonders what she's doing here, in a place like this. But she doesn't want to answer, and she's a bit unsettled. The truth is, she's looking for a holy relic that can prove her royal lineage. The relic vanished without a trace, but the royal court couldn't care less. But Kiana has known where it is since she was 12. Once, her maternal grandfather's brother, Julius came to visit. The emperor summoned him, wanting to know where the relic was. The emperor put Scary in charge of the search, after waiting for a whole decade. This was supposed to be a secret, and Kiana doesn't understand why Julius would blab about it. But since he was returning to the north soon, he decided to spill the secret. It turns out the high priest had hidden the relic well, and he wouldn't reveal the secret unless he was dead drunk, but now he can't even afford a drink. The reason Julius told her was that making Kiana happy was more important than keeping the secret. And now, she's trying to pry that secret out, which is why she needed to get him drunk. But she never actually told the Marquis what secret she was after. Caesar doesn't press the issue and just strokes Kiana's hair. It feels so comfortable that she tells the Marquis to keep going. Then she starts to get sleepy again, slumps right onto his lap, and closes her eyes. The last time she felt this comforted was with Julius, and it feels so good to feel a warm hand again. Her mother used to care for her like this, but no one else ever did. Kiana mutters in a half-asleep state that Piaggi is not Melissa's familiar. She kept saying it, but no one believed her, and eventually, she stopped believing herself. Because she didn't trust her own intuition, the girl felt incredibly lonely. The Marquis listens to her ramblings and begins to understand what she's been through. Then she confesses that when she started researching magical technology, she began to believe in herself again. More importantly, even complete strangers started to take her seriously. She loves the technology because it gave her confidence. Then, in a sleepy voice, Kiana starts to ask how the Marquis has been. He admits he hasn't fully dealt with something, but with someone's help, he's made some progress. He even resorted to some dirty tricks to dig deeper, but still hasn't gotten the answers he wants. In any case, he doesn't think his actions were a complete waste of time. Caesar admits that after going through hell, he shut himself off from everyone because the people he trusted betrayed him badly. Kiana herself suffered a great loss after 7 years at the academy. She trusted everyone and dedicated herself to the cause, only to be kept completely in the dark. She wonders what the Marquis would do in a similar situation. He confesses that he became the very person he used to hate. After all, he's been using people and doesn't believe he can form a real connection with anyone. Kiana suddenly sits up and tells him not to let others see him as a heartless bastard. She also asks him not to look down on himself so much and to stop hating himself. She believes that if he tries, he can become a better person and asks him not to push away new relationships. Kiana's face twists into a drunken smile, but she asks the Marquis to be happy. Then she starts to lose consciousness again, slumping in Caesar's arms. He starts begging her to hold on, because he wants to ask her something. He wants to know what allows her to keep striving towards the light. Without opening her eyes, she starts explaining everything in scientific terms again. But it doesn't last long, as she passes out again. She starts dreaming again, hearing voices discussing a prince during a hunt, and saying that the prince himself now trusts no one, and everyone is just a means to an end for him. While she's napping, her maid is waiting for her, searching through the crowd. The Marquis' assistant is with her, and they both hope everything is all right. Meanwhile, Alice is still cursing the culprit who caused this chaos. But soon, they see Kiana approaching them, leaning on the Marquis. The maid immediately rushes to her side and asks if something happened. Kiana confesses that she fell asleep and had a very strange dream. Seeing that Kiana is safe, the Marquis says his goodbyes and prepares to head back. But he doesn't go far. He and his assistant hide in a corner to observe. He wants to figure out why the lady is looking for a holy relic and why she mentioned the crown prince. Kiana hurries back, wanting to send the letter to the Duchy of Rashini while there's still time. She also complains to Alice about the Marquis' pitifully poor athletic ability. Combined with his suspicious business dealings, he's repulsing her more and more. But now she understands why a man who looks like that has never had a girlfriend. Those words sting the Marquis deeply. He wants to explain, but he can't. Meanwhile, Kiana is already feeling much better, her hangover quickly fading. Now her goal is to find the holy relic and make sure no one else gets it. She's worried that Heaton will find it and try to destroy it. Also, Meyer might leak the secret to him while drunk, just as he did with her. The girl thinks of the boy in the forest, guessing he's using the gift she gave him to blend in better and not expose himself in public. Moreover, he is a sword master, and those people can use their aura to obscure their faces, which is why people's memories of them are often a bit hazy. If the crown prince has changed his appearance, we'll need that holy relic to restore him to the throne. But it's also possible that one of his confidants survived and is plotting revenge for him. Still, Kiana hopes the crown prince is alive, or that he has a child. She's so lost in thought that her maid has to call out to her, asking her to get in the carriage. Kiana admits she's been thinking about the crown prince. Then she gets into the carriage, and they head for the Frel estate. The Marquis is still around the corner, stunned by everything he just heard. He prepares to follow the lady, but his assistant starts trying to talk him out of it. Kiana relaxes for the rest of the day, finally feeling like herself again. But her mind is a mess, thinking about the crazy things she blurted out to the Marquis and the information she got from Meyer, especially that a priest's divine power can't actually turn back time. Now she's stressed about how this all happened, but doubts she could have changed anything anyway. Still, one of her goals is to let her grandfather know that Heaton is targeting their family. Even though the old man already knows the prince despises them, she still naively hopes her grandfather can solve everything for her. So the girl decides to do everything she can on her own. Late that night, she leaves the house, seen off by her maid. But Alice is told to stay at the estate, because brute force won't help this time. The maid is a bit shocked. She's of no use, and she's worried about her lady. But her lady tells her not to worry, and Alice, almost in tears, promises to train harder and become stronger. She also can't believe she's going to miss such a once-in-a-lifetime spectacle. After saying goodbye to her maid, Kiana heads to a secret meeting spot to meet with a Bayan Rashini, who is curious where she wants to go so late. Kiana had sent him a letter earlier asking for his company. Now she explains that she needs to go to a rather dangerous place. She doesn't want to bring any knights, so as not to worry her grandfather. Besides, this is a chance for the captain of the guard to repay his debt to her. Before telling him the destination, Kiana demands that he keep his mouth shut, because they're going to Pier 4 of Alfredport. The place was recently raided for smuggling, and Abian worries the lady is involved. But she assures him that if that were the case, she wouldn't have brought the captain of the guard along. She even snaps that his logic is flawed and suggests he take a math refresher. For now, he should just focus on providing security. Abian agrees, but asks that she answer all his questions afterward. Meanwhile, on the other side, a cloaked figure is walking towards the pier. Soon, he sees what he's looking for, a statue of a goddess. The man is none other than Marquis Caesar Levine, thrilled that he found it first. Approaching it, he touches a feather on the statue's wing to open a hidden compartment. Instantly, a stone with a magical pattern drops from the bottom of the pedestal. You have to do this when the moonlight hits the statue. It's the only way to open the cache. The holy relic glows in the hands of someone with royal blood, and right now, it's glowing in the Marquis's hand. He really ought to thank Kiana for this discovery. He couldn't have done it without her. Then he remembers her advice that he could try to be a better person. He used to think that being a good person meant being a fool for others to use. But now he understands why Kiana is giving him the cold shoulder. Caesar thought the child who fell in love was long gone. But now, he can't shake the feeling that Kiana might show up here too. 6 years ago, when they first met in the forest, he knew exactly who she was. He didn't need any confirmation. He would have recognized her even if he didn't want to. Fate had played a cruel joke on him, and everyone had betrayed him. And this girl, whom he could probably never get close to, had saved his life. But he needs her abilities to make a comeback, even though he doesn't want to put her in danger. That's why he kept sending her research requests, trying to keep her safe at the academy a little longer. But she came back anyway, and in that alley, he felt like he was that ignorant crown prince all over again. He can feel his heart starting to waver. Now, he leaves a note in the cache, telling her to stay away from the dangerous holy relics. The Marquis thinks that if things stay quiet, the investigation will just die down. Moreover, he even leaves a gem here for Kiana as a thank you. Suddenly, he detects some very suspicious rustling, so he immediately hides behind a corner, trying not to be seen. Then the Marquis hears voices discussing their next move. It's Kiana's voice, and it's clear she's with the captain of the guard. They had to ride horses to get here, and now the girl's entire back is killing her. Abayan finally understands why the lady didn't bring her lover along. The girl is surprised the news reached the captain so quickly, and she also found out the Marquis returned the handkerchief, indicating he's found someone new. Just then, she starts complaining about how useless he is, saying he definitely couldn't handle any bandits that might show up. This startles Abayan because the Marquis gives off a very strong aura of a swordmaster. Kiana pauses, but they're not here to chat, so she tells the captain to turn around while she takes care of something. Abayan Rashini obediently turns towards the horses, though he's dying to peek. The girl opens the hidden compartment and finds a note and a gem. Immediately after, she lets out an angry growl and admits to her guard that they just came all this way for nothing. Then she decides to scribble something on the note herself. After that, she shoves it back into the hiding spot and suggests they head back. It annoys her, but she's used to hitting dead ends. If she gave up, she wouldn't be able to conduct her research. The captain confesses that he's also training to overcome setbacks. He's even jealous of the Crown Prince because the Crown Prince never had to deal with that kind of crap, because he could master in one go the skills that took others a lifetime to learn. Abayan starts gushing about how the Crown Prince was a genius and everything came easy to him. At this, Kiana wonders why he couldn't solve his own weight problem. The captain doesn't know what to say and guesses he didn't have the need. Then he admits that, in his opinion, Kiana seems just as gifted, and she really is, just having hit a setback this time. Since there's nothing left for them here, the girl again suggests they leave. But just then, the captain stops her, saying he doesn't think their long trip was for nothing. He pauses and gives her a you should know it can look. Neither of them knows that the Marquis is watching their every move. Abayan suggests that Lady Frel make a wish to the goddess statue. The girl doesn't believe in superstitions, but agrees anyway. Caesar suddenly feels a pang of jealousy, because the captain is kinder and more excellent than she expected. Kiana gazes at the statue, which seems to shimmer in the moonlight. She starts to think about what to wish for, a wish she won't regret later. But in the end, she prays for the Crown Prince to be alive, which is what she wants most. She wishes for Edmund to return to the throne safely. Hearing her whisper, the Marquis is completely stunned. The captain is curious why the lady specifically made that wish, but the girl won't say, just telling him to head back. Abayan still wants to know who she'll be with at the royal banquet, and she admits she'll be with Marquis Caesar Levine. The captain accepts it, though he wanted to escort her himself. He wanted to get to know her better, but realizes he's already missed his chance. Then Kiana says that even if she went to the banquet with him, he wouldn't be able to see her any more clearly, because that would require an ultra-high-power microscope. The captain doesn't understand what she means, but doesn't argue. Then he offers to let her go back by herself, as if he hadn't heard her earlier request. He helps Kiana onto her horse, and confesses that he has a question for her. But since it's too late, he decides to ask next time. As they ride away, the Marquis emerges from his hiding spot, trying to figure out what Kiana had said that morning. Caesar calls over his assistant, Ronick, and asks him what it means to want to live a normal life. It was like someone telling another person that he could be better and happier, and then he asked his aide to describe how he was feeling at that moment. Randak was at a loss for a moment. He had answered the first question, but was now stumped. Then, Caesar wanted to know if he knew anyone in the Empire who genuinely wished for him to return as the Crown Prince. The aide froze, racking his brain to think of everyone he knew and didn't know. But he couldn't come up with an answer, especially since he had only just arrived in the capital. And now, the Marquis was more curious as to why Kiana would make such a wish without hesitation. He also wanted to know if she had taken his heartfelt words to heart at all. After all, he had later checked the reply the girl had sent him. She thought he was a scumbag and told him to get lost and not to boss her around. Meanwhile, in a distant southern region of the Empire, in a dense forest, a white dove landed on a wide tree stump with a note tied to its leg. Alex Freeley spotted it from the bushes and started to approach. He was a little annoyed because the bird always arrived silently, and he told it to make some noise. The constant nightmares were already bothering him enough. But he took the note anyway and leaned in to read it closely. His summoned beast, a wolf, was right beside him, and it flinched when Alex started to curse. After reading it, he looked even more crazed than usual. In the dead of night, the guy just hissed that they needed to return to the Duchy of Reloni. Alex was the spitting image of his grandfather, and he had looked after his younger sister since they were little. He remembered their mother holding the tiny child in her arms, and how the family fell apart in an instant after she ran off with a coachman. Then Kiana went to the academy, but she was now back at the ducal residence, meaning she was taking a step toward the family. Alex was furious about the news he had just received, because he had to go to the academy to take care of something. The wolf immediately crouched down so its master could climb on. He roared in anger, ordering it to run faster, so he could get there and put an end to this. Lorelei's magazine soon published an article about the romance between Marquis Levine and Miss Fraley. But the bigger event was the banquet for Prince Heaton's birthday. Joshua had sent his sister a whole bunch of new dresses for the occasion. But Kiana didn't want to outshine everyone, especially not in dresses that weren't plaid. So she had her maid return everything to Joshua. Kiana decided to wear the one she wore last time, her favorite plaid dress. The pattern was super important to her because she was obsessed with science and math. Alice thought her taste was unique, but it came out sounding a bit disrespectful. An annoyed Kiana demanded coffee, not some crappy herbal tea. She was totally faking her anger just to make sure she got that cup of coffee, especially after her attempt to bribe the doctor for permission had utterly failed. Suddenly, she started missing her days at the academy, when this was never an issue. She had been dreaming of that place often since she returned. She also dreamed of when her parents were still together, and then she would hear her mother's cries. She'd had nightmares like this since she was a child, and they had even taken her to see a psychiatrist. He believed psychological stress was the reason she still had these dreams. He talked about dreams that were never fulfilled and suggested they keep it a secret from the adults upstairs. Kiana had agreed at the time because she didn't want to seem greedy. Growing up, she mostly played by herself and never let anyone get close. She also often feigned illness to avoid those fancy social events. But even then, she would find ways to cause trouble for her cousin, Melissa. Later, there were rumors that Kiana had become friends with Judith of the Perves family. Now, Kiana was back to playing chess by herself. The maid announced that the Duke wanted to see her to thank her for curing him. Kiana guessed her grandfather wanted to give her something and got ready at once. Besides, before the banquet, Kiana wanted to ask him for a favor. Meanwhile, at the Perves estate, Rodrigo walked into the room where his sister, Judith, was. She was writing a letter to Kiana because of the royal banquet tomorrow, and she wanted to know why she had returned. After all, Judith was the one and only noble lady in the entire empire who always loved being the center of attention. She had hated the Freelet family and their special abilities since she was a child, but she was also happy about Kiana's return because Kiana always came to visit Rodrigo. That was the only reason Judith had always been so warm to her. Plus, Kiana considered her a friend and was easily persuaded to make Melissa's life more difficult. It was especially comical when Kiana threw a tantrum in front of everyone. Even her parents were thrilled because they thought she was much better than the Frelets. Plus, Kiana was the spitting image of the late Duchess Ines, and the Perves family would become even more prominent if she married Rodrigo. They were always whispering in her ear that it was for her own good and for the good of both families, because everyone still remembered the scandal surrounding the death of Duchess Ines. Judith also told Kiana not to get close to anyone because everyone saw her as the black sheep of the family, and Kiana trusted her friends' words more than her own family's. Anyway, on a sunny day, she left for the academy. Now, Judith was plotting how to make Kiana never show her face at any event again. She wanted to break her and turn her back into her little puppet. Besides, there was nothing to stop Rodrigo from marrying the girl later on. He was very grateful to his sister for being so considerate of him. He felt that everything would have gone smoothly anyway if Orca hadn't gone crazy. Judith told her brother not to rely too much on the prince's help, but Rodrigo was sure the prince would continue to cover for him, as he had poisoned the crown prince who thought himself immune to all poisons. When Kiana entered her grandfather's study, she saw a mountain of jewels. Scary had personally ordered the butler to buy all the latest fashionable trinkets. The girl thanked him for the gift and promised to make good use of it at the banquet. The Duke remembered that Julius was also supposed to arrive today. Then he told his granddaughter to let him know if she needed anything else. Kiana wanted coffee, but the old man wouldn't budge unless she was as healthy as Alex. Just then, the girl made another request, one related to the royal banquet. Scary hadn't attended a banquet in years, with Melissa and Alex attending in his stead. This left Melissa alone at the mercy of Judith Perves. She did her utmost to please every man around her. Kiana couldn't care less about public opinion, but she had learned from Melissa that Judith and her gang were surely up to something again. Thinking about how her grandfather had worried he'd messed up raising her, Kiana wanted to confess all the dirty little secrets she had heard. But those were not the last of the crimes committed by the Perves family. The Onstone mine existed to keep the soldiers of the Freelet Duchy warm in the north. A year later, the Perves family forged the mine's records, which would become evidence to accuse the Freelet family of treason. Now Kiana wasn't just out for revenge. She was settling a family feud. She asked her grandfather to make sure Julius attended the banquet. Meanwhile, Julius was riding through forests and fields, thinking about his brother's assassination and how foolish he had been to let the assassin get so close. Now, he felt it was his responsibility to correct the Duke of Freelet's thinking. On his shoulder sat his summoned beast, the squirrel Durham, which urged him to make a decision. Didn't it find it a bit annoying how he would insult his brother one moment and praise him the next? Suddenly, Julius noticed a carrier pigeon flying toward them, but it flew right past. The pigeon carried a message saying the culprit had committed suicide, so there was no need to come. But Julius hadn't been to the capital in many years. He was only allowed to go once every 10 years. And even then, it was only when he used his ability. He had even missed Ines's funeral. At times like these, Durham always supported its master with sympathy. He never believed her death was an accident, especially since he had raised her. Ines was the daughter of a high-ranking northern noble, but she had lost her family. Julius took her in. She later married Scary's eldest son. The last time Julius saw her, she was happy, and then this whole mess happened. So Julius believed that if Kiana wasn't Hyde's daughter, then she must be Ines's child. He couldn't wait to see what kind of woman she had grown into. Even the squirrel was eager to meet her, wanting to figure out why its master was so fascinated. The last time Julius was there, he felt something very familiar about Kiana. The old man believed that if she hadn't been able to summon her beast yet, then she must have a big problem, which also meant Kiana's power might emerge in a completely unexpected way. Durham excitedly blurted out that Julius had finally said something smart. I mean, it spent 10 years trying to drill that idea into him, but Julius dismissed it, saying it had nothing to do with the squirrel's ability. He was just convinced that if any trouble was going down there, he needed to be in the middle of it. A while later, Kiana received a gift from the Duchy of Perves. It was a hairpin from Judith with an accompanying note. In it, she wrote that since Kiana was back, she was looking forward to her visit. She wrote that she and her parents had picked out the hairpin together and that they had always thought of Kiana as a daughter. She had bought an identical one for herself, but in blue, so they would match. Reading the last lines about how Judith considered her a friend, Kiana crumpled the letter. She threw it at the trash can, but the paper hit the rim and fell out. The maid immediately picked it up, not wanting any trash on the floor. Alice noticed the hairpin was heavy and worried her lady would hurt her fingers. But Kiana told her to get it ready, intending to wear it later. She also told Alice not to worry about Judith, because Kiana was much smarter than that scumbag. Now, the Duke of Perves was in for more than just a bad day. Soon, Judith and her brother appeared at the party. Kiana hadn't arrived yet, but she saw Prince Heaton and his mother. Princess Celia wasn't there either, but no one really cared about her anyway. Judith remembered Kiana was dating someone, and Rodrigo explained it was a commoner. He felt she had just grabbed onto someone to escape the pressure, and his sister was planning to remind her of some old baggage today. But then she noticed the front doors opening again. The guests gathered there all gasped when they saw the couple that walked in. For a moment, everyone held their breath, watching the two of them cross the threshold. Then, the master of ceremonies announced the arrival of Miss Kiana Freelie and Marquis Caesar Levine. Amid the murmurs, the Marquis looked very pleased, but the lady's expression was serious. As they passed by Judith, she nearly fainted. Kiana and Caesar walked right past without even a glance. She only came to her senses when the guests started whispering behind her back. She also noticed that Kiana was actually wearing the jewelry she had sent. This made Judith realize Kiana was still listening to her. She was happy about this, but at the same time, she was jealous that Kiana had such a handsome man. But she suddenly realized she couldn't remember his face. Right after, melodious music began to play, and everyone moved to the dance floor in pairs. Kiana noticed the Marquis dance surprisingly well, especially considering he didn't seem good at any physical activity normally. He then confessed that he was just being extra careful that one time because his dance partner was dead drunk. And normally, he could handle not just crowds, but even the real tough guys at the docks. The Marquis admitted he frequented the docks and always came back unscathed, which made Kiana think he was a suspicious character. This just confirmed her suspicion. A handsome bachelor couldn't possibly be a decent person. She even started to feel that her plan to fall in love with and marry Caesar was going down the drain. The Marquis wanted to ask her a question, and Kiana agreed, as long as it was about science. But Caesar's question was about the human heart, and he wanted to hear her thoughts. He was curious why a girl would worry about a man she barely knew. Kiana figured either she was too bored, or the girl was just playing dumb. Or maybe she was a little interested in him deep down. This answer sent the Marquis into deep thought, and all sorts of ideas began to swirl in his mind. His ears even turned red, completely giving away his embarrassment. Kiana noticed and thought Caesar was talking about himself. Suddenly, he pulled her closer because Rodrigo was staring daggers at them. The guy was obviously watching the girl of his dreams dance with someone else and was about to go mad with anger. Kiana noticed him, and she even enjoyed his reaction. Of the entire Perves family, Rodrigo was the most detestable. To her, the fact that he had lost Melissa and was now losing Kiana honestly made her happy. To provoke him further, she snuggled closer to the Marquis. Caesar noticed his lady hadn't liked that guy from the start. Kiana admitted that she used to follow him around when she was a child. The Marquis realized she actually liked someone else, like the Crown Prince. But she objected, explaining that she had different tastes as a child, and told him not to pair her up with just anyone just because she hated Rodrigo now. Being compared to just anyone as a prince made the Marquis a little dejected. He wasn't about to let Kiana tell him to forget the past. Dancing with her at this moment, he wished he could go back to being the child he once was. The way he looked at her then, it was as if he had known Kiana his whole life. He looked like someone who truly cared for her. A total charmer. The dance ended soon, and Kiana suggested they go their separate ways. Just as she was about to leave, he handed her a cream-filled cookie. Then, he handed her some candy and a lemon soda. He explained that he figured she might be hungry after dancing, so he had everything prepared. He even admitted that he had thoroughly enjoyed dancing with her. While Kiana was nibbling on the cookie, the Marquis was wiping crumbs from her chin. Only then did he agree to leave her, saying it was like a dream. Then Caesar left, and Kiana watched him until he disappeared into the crowd. She then realized he had been speaking to her in some kind of code. She also realized she had never danced at a banquet before. Now she noticed that after dancing for so long, she was really hungry. Just then, a Bayan Rashini came over and asked her for the next dance. Kiana hadn't expected this, but it would be rude to refuse him. Still, she asked if they could postpone the dance for an hour, as she suddenly felt tired. Someone started complaining about the captain of the 5th guard asking a lady to dance. The captain of the 1st guard, Nix, also known as the town drunk, approached them. He used to be the crown prince's bodyguard and was part of the hunting party. Now he was accusing Abian of crashing the club, saying he was ignoring the rules just because he was a high-ranking noble. Nix even had the gall to mock Rashini for flirting with a lady who was considered the shame of the Freelay family. Just then, Kiana cut in, calling Nix a real piece of work. Then she glared at him as if she wanted to tear him to shreds. On the spot, Nix tried to play it cool and decided to show some manners by greeting her, but he accidentally stepped on her foot, and it really hurt. Both captains were horrified, worried the lady was injured, but she didn't even flinch. She just scolded Nix for forgetting the first rule, no drinking on duty. After slapping him on the back of the head, she called him a disgrace to the guard. But then Kiana pretended she had misspoken, adding that the captain of the 1st guard was a disgrace to Prince Heaton. This blatant insult sent Nix into a rage. He wanted to retaliate, but Kiana stomped on his foot with her heel. A sharp pain shot through, and the captain barely managed to hold back a scream. And the girl just explained her actions with some boring scientific terms. But that wasn't enough. She pressed her sharp heel harder onto Nix's foot. She actually wanted to beat him to a pulp right then and there, but she restrained herself. She just advised him not to call people the shame of their family to their face, especially her. Just then, Kiana removed her heel from his foot, hoping the captain would get the message. In a sinister whisper, she asked if he was scared now. But he straightened up and yelled at her, his foul breath hitting her in the face. It disgusted her, and the smell was especially nauseating since she had been drinking herself. So she took a step back and told him not to speak to her no matter how urgent it was. He seemed to be waiting for just that and immediately took his leave. Kiana explained to Abian that she had another meeting and also began to take her leave. Meanwhile, in the Latin Quarter, Joshua was debating whether to go to the reception. Because of his status, he wasn't supposed to be there, but he didn't want to leave his sister alone. He was worried she'd get lost or trampled in the crowd, even though she could probably beat up anyone there. His snake just snickered, watching Joshua struggle internally while enthusiastically picking out an outfit. He remembered his sister was supposed to meet Julius at the reception, and Joshua had a very unpleasant history with that guy. But if Kiana was going to meet him, at least she wouldn't be alone. The snake reminded him again that the girl could take care of herself. Joshua still decided to go to the reception just to put his own mind at ease. He made an excuse for himself, telling himself he had something important to tell Kiana. Meanwhile, Kiana went out to the garden, looking for a large fountain in a secluded spot. She soon found the spot she was looking for and peeked from behind the bushes. A girl with long blue hair was sitting by the fountain. It was Princess Celia, the daughter of the 5th Empress. The princess had no family, no support, and was completely forgotten by everyone. Suddenly, a man's voice rang out, announcing that he had dismissed the guards and maids because everyone in the palace now listened only to him. Celia shot up to run, but the man stopped her. He grabbed her arm tightly and pulled her to his side. He declared that soon, rumors would spread that she had spent the night with him. If a noble happened to see them now, Prince Heaton would be forced to have them marry. Despite their difference in social status, they would be considered old lovers. Besides, even if he was a servant, he was of half-noble blood. He was certain Prince Heaton would find out about this. Kiana saw the bastard blackmailing the princess and was absolutely furious. He was saying that no one could help Celia even if she screamed her lungs out. Just then, with a zap, a jolt of electricity hit his neck. It made him see stars. He collapsed heavily, and Kiana leaned over him, calling him a pervert. The princess couldn't believe someone had actually come to her rescue. As Kiana cursed him out, the scumbag threatened her with his connections. She couldn't care less. He wasn't worthy anyway, and he would pay for what he did. Then, Kiana took out a taser and threatened to zap him again. It was her personal self-defense weapon, still in its prototype stage. The thing could even take down a sore master, and it was available for purchase in the Freelay Duchy. Seeing he was about to get zapped again, the guy ran off like his tail was on fire. This coward's name was Ben Eyelid, a servant in the crown princess's palace, and he was also one of the members of that hunting trip. A total failure. After he left, Kiana asked the princess if she was all right. Up close, Celia was even more stunningly beautiful, and it was obvious why the third empress had caused such a stir. But right now, the princess just hoped the whole incident with that man wouldn't blow up. That wasn't what Kiana was talking about, though. She just wanted to know if her highness was hurt. She explained that what mattered was how she was feeling right now. The next second, tears streamed down the princess's face. She tried to explain, but only broken sobs came out. Kiana just stayed by Celia's side until she had cried her heart out. Originally, the princess was supposed to scream the moment they attacked, and Ben, the servant, would have run away. But some fashionable ladies were strolling nearby at the time, and they heard the scream, resulting in only Celia's reputation being damaged. Kiana knew nothing serious would have happened, but the princess was genuinely terrified. So Miss Freelie decided to give her a taser in case something similar happened again. She showed her how to use it and told her not to hesitate to zap the scumbag. Celia couldn't accept a gift from a stranger, but Kiana convinced her and then prepared to go to her own appointment. The princess, in turn, said, "How can I ever thank you for your help? I mean, this girl had not only saved her from a scoundrel, but had also comforted her." In fact, Kiana did have a favor to ask of her highness, but she felt it was strange to ask a favor of a victim. Yet since the princess had offered, she didn't want to refuse. So Miss Freelie asked the princess for two things. First, she asked her not to tell anyone about the taser. Second, she suggested Celia prepare a recording device for similar situations. If such an incident could be secretly recorded, it would be key evidence. But to make one, Eshra petals were needed, and that flower only grew in the 5th Empress's greenhouse, which the princess happened to inherit. Eshra was a rare flower imbued with magic, and it was about to bloom. Kiana wanted some of the petals. She explained that this was the very reason she had come, but she had barged in at the worst possible moment. Celia promised to deliver the petals to her savior. After that, they finally said their goodbyes. Celia was even happy about it, as she now had an excuse to see the lady again. She recognized her and now understood why she was Ed's first love. Meanwhile, on the other side of the garden, Judith was begging her parents to go see Kiana. She had a special plan that required Rodrigo's help to pull off. Judging from Miss Fraley's behavior, she felt everything would go according to plan. Kiana sweetly thanked her for the gift and letter and, in return, invited Judith to meet her parents in the garden after the second dance. Judith quickly found the place mentioned in the letter, unable to wait. Soon, she spotted Kiana and immediately started waving. Kiana walked calmly toward her, knowing she was putting on an act. Judith was annoyed that her friend had become so beautiful, but she kept quiet. Coming closer, she noticed the hairpin really suited Kiana, but then she suddenly declared she didn't like the accessory and walked toward the Duke and Duchess. They were happy to see Kiana, who had grown to resemble Ines so much. But the girl herself started to feel sick, as they also reeked of alcohol. The ducal couple was sweating nervously, worried that everyone was dredging up the past, and that Kiana didn't even have a summoned beast. Then the Duchess noticed Kiana was wearing a hairpin, identical to Judith's. Kiana realized their reaction was different from before. Still, she admitted she had been hearing similar things her whole damn life. The ducal couple constantly reminded her that she wasn't a true Freelie. Judith always hammered home that no one would ever love someone like Kiana. Just then, the Duchess started making excuses, saying they only wanted what was best for her. She leaned in close, and Kiana knew she couldn't hold it in. The nauseating smell made her vomit right onto the Duchess's dress. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed. From the dust kicked up behind the ducal couple, a man appeared, furious with the Perves family. It was Julius, and seeing Kiana in this state, he was burning with rage. Besides, at his age, he could still teach the Dukes a lesson for all the bullshit they'd been saying to her, and he didn't give a damn about propriety. He figured the Dukes themselves were old and frail, their bodies practically falling apart. Duke Perves was the first to be sent flying, and then the old man went went after the Duchess. But just then, a sharp pain shot through his neck as if he'd been electrocuted. Kiana, still vomiting, began to worry about her relative. Just then, the guards ran over and suggested taking the injured man to the infirmary. By now, the old man's back was also killing him, so the soldiers lifted him onto a stretcher. But then, Duke Fraley himself appeared, completely unaware of what had happened. As it turned out, he had also heard Duke Perves slandering his granddaughter, saying she was unworthy of the title of Miss Fraley. Kiana was very surprised. She hadn't expected to see her grandfather here, and he couldn't believe they had pushed his brother to this point. But what truly angered him was that Perves had been filling Kiana's head with such garbage since she was a child. Just then, Joshua suddenly appeared and reminded everyone that Kiana had been hiding from people and was reclusive since childhood because of the Perves family. Noticing his sister's face was even paler than usual, he suggested they leave. The rest could be left to their grandfather, especially since he only got tougher with age. Kiana couldn't figure out how her grandfather and brother, who never attended banquets, had suddenly appeared, but she was thrilled that the Perves family was finally going to get its comeuppance. She even took off the hairpin they had given her and threw it into the fountain like trash. Then she said she didn't want to see what happened next and agreed to go see Julius. Basically, everything was going exactly according to her plan, and this was just the beginning. Back in the banquet hall, a chandelier fell, and the Marquis began to worry sick about Kiana. His assistant, Ranyak, told Mr. Caesar Levine that she was in the infirmary with an injured relative. He also said the carriage was ready at the entrance, but the Marquis decided to go to the infirmary as well. After all, even if he was just a fake fiancé, he had to play the part completely. He kept telling himself that this was all just an act and nothing more. But his assistant seemed to see through Caesar's facade. However, he didn't argue and just silently followed him to the infirmary. A group of doctors was already bustling around the old man, trying to help him. Julius was unconscious for a moment, and they began to think he was a goner. But he suddenly opened his eyes and told everyone not to make a fuss. He also announced that he was abandoning his contract with the Perves family and would procure supplies from Ansoc instead. This was exactly what Kiana had hoped for. It was much more effective for Julius to be the one to announce it. The girl was delighted, but she had another favor to ask of the old man. So she went up to him and said she had something that could replace Ansoc. It was called Fibo, and if you ground it into a powder and put it in a pocket, it would oxidize and give off heat. Julius was all for the idea and agreed to adopt it. However, Joshua had heard that it was very difficult to get that kind of ore these days. At that moment, Kiana confessed that they had found a Fibo or mine on the Marquis' land, and it wasn't far from the north. Joshua was stunned. It was an absolute godsend. Suddenly, the door was thrown open, and medical staff began to shout about an emergency patient. The man was groaning wildly, and Kiana found the voice strangely familiar. It turned out to be the captain of the first guard, who had somehow been seriously injured and was screaming in agony, especially his foot, the very one Kiana had encountered earlier. The foot was completely crushed. Nick screamed incessantly, babbling incoherently about seeing the crown prince. He even pointed at the silver hair, saying he could recognize him from a mile away. Then, Alice burst into the infirmary, pleading with Kiana to return to the duchy. A chandelier had fallen in the hall. The scene was chaotic, and the lights were flickering wildly. Right after the first blackout, Captain Nix was seriously injured and had gone completely mad. He was screaming that the crown prince was back, just as Orcus Eddie had originally said. Originally, Nix and Ben were attacked and subsequently branded as traitors. There was supposed to be a long interval between those attacks, but the prince's revenge was coming much faster. In any case, the other participants of that picnic wouldn't be getting a good night's sleep anytime soon, and Kiana hoped the one tossing and turning all night would be Rodrigo. The guests at that picnic were Orca, Nix, Ben, Rodrigo, and King Enoch. They were all considered to be in the crown prince's inner circle, and all were nobles. As Kiana stood beside her brother, pondering all this, the Marquis approached. He explained that things had calmed down outside, and that he was here to escort the lady back to the duchy. Joshua noticed the Marquis' cape was more expensive than his own, while Julius admired his physique. But when he heard this guy was Kiana's lover, he started bad-mouthing him, trying to drive him away. The girl quickly clarified that this was the Marquis who owned the mine. The old man immediately shouted that they needed to sign a contract first, and then the Marquis Marquis could get lost. Julius calmed down a bit and declared that Kiana's lover should at least be a sword master. Ram began to plead with the old man to stop dreaming and take care of himself first, telling him to go back to his own duchy because he looked exhausted. Just then, Kiana remembered she was supposed to meet a buy-in in the tulip hall. The chandelier had fallen right there, and now no one was allowed inside. Everyone else had already left, and the Marquis presumed that Captain was no exception. Caesar once again suggested they head back, promising to ensure everyone else was escorted out as well. Joshua suddenly announced that they would all be taking the Fraley family carriage back. The Marquis explained that the main entrance was blocked, but he could offer his carriage, which was waiting at the back entrance. It would be easier for them to leave that way, especially with an injured person. Joshua agreed without hesitation, realizing the Marquis was right. Now, he couldn't even be angry at him, because the guy had thought of everything so thoroughly. In the carriage, Joshua helped Julius get settled so he wouldn't hurt his back again. Meanwhile, Kiana signaled to him that they needed to consider the terms of the deal on the way. And so, the carriage carrying the injured man headed for the duchy. Miss Fraley was still with the Marquis, waiting for her grandfather to appear. He was taking a long time, so she guessed he was still dealing with the Perves family. Just then, Caesar suggested they shouldn't linger any longer and should head back as well. Miss Fraley thought for a few seconds and agreed to ride with the Marquis. Meanwhile, Prince Heaton was furious. He ordered his men to find Old Man Meyer as soon as possible and discover the hiding place of the artifact. Afterward, the prince went to visit the injured captain of the First Guard. The captain kept muttering to himself that it was the crown prince, even mentioning a secret between them. He was terrified, recalling the sight of the crown prince's silver hair in the moonlight. Heaton couldn't understand how he could have appeared. They had searched every inch of the land for 6 years. However, Nix himself wasn't entirely convinced, as he had been dead, drunk since the start of the banquet. Rodrigo even thought it might be some resentful person playing tricks, pretending to be the crown prince. Heaton hoped so, but deep down he had a bad feeling. Now that the crown prince's name had come up twice, he needed to find that artifact as soon as possible. Just then, a servant appeared and reported that Meyer had finally talked. So Prince Heaton decided to go and interrogate him personally. As soon as he heard about the statue of the goddess, he raced to the docks. He was almost dizzy with the thought that his wish was finally about to come true. Moreover, he had already obtained the method to open the secret compartment. He began to pray that everything would go smoothly and he would get the artifact. When he pressed the feather, a slip of paper fell out of the hiding place. The prince was stunned, thinking the gods were playing a trick on him. But the note he got did have instructions written on it. He frantically unfolded the paper and began to read the words, which told some lowlife to get lost. The prince's confusion reached its peak. He couldn't believe this was a message from the gods. His body began to tremble, and he slowly started to tear the note to shreds. He was consumed by rage, but then he broke down, scattering the scraps of paper everywhere and screaming his lungs out on the docks. Meanwhile, in the carriage with the Marquis, Kiana was thinking back on the commotion. She couldn't believe the crown prince was already back, but a sliver of hope ignited within her. Caesar couldn't give her an answer, letting her think for herself. He couldn't just admit he was the crown prince right then and there, could he? The girl began to wonder if this was really the crown prince's revenge. If it was, she hoped Rodrigo would be the last on the list, as he was the type you save for last, to let him be consumed by anxiety and doubt. The Marquis simply commented that the lady had thought everything through, as if she knew a lot about torture. Kiana suddenly admitted that she was indeed experienced. Then Caesar asked how her foot was, the one the captain had stepped on. The girl was surprised, because her fiancé had been nowhere near her at the time. He admitted he had seen everything from a distance, keeping an eye on her since she was his partner. Miss Fraley just said sarcastically that he had excellent eyesight, and then she admitted she felt relieved seeing the captain's leg in a mess. Just then, she noticed the Marquis was staring at her a little too intently, and he confessed that this all felt like an incredible dream. But then he explained that being back at the Imperial Palace made him feel like a child again. He suddenly wondered if Kiana had ever considered marrying into the royal family. The girl almost screamed, because Prince Heaton was not her type at all. The Marquis explained that the crown prince might still be alive. If that were the case, Kiana would agree to become the empress, but she added that she wouldn't let him have any concubines, as she was very jealous. Only the emperor was allowed to have multiple concubines, and even that wasn't a given. Just then, the Marquis blurted out that he would be sure to remember these things. Then he wondered to himself how Kiana would change the situation for the Empress. He promised to pass on her wishes, saying that if she didn't like being the Empress, there must be something wrong with the position itself. The girl started to think, finding these questions a bit strange, but she immediately said she couldn't even dare to think about it, because even the crown prince wasn't her type. He suddenly asked if she liked the Marquis, which caught Kiana completely off guard. After all, he was the complete opposite of the prince, inside and out. And Caesar wondered if a lady like her would like such a man. Kiana said it would be perfect if you mix them half and half. Caesar found that strange, but he just smiled, and Miss Fraley once again found his smile very strange and mysterious. Then she admitted she wanted to propose another deal to him. She started talking about the Fibo or on his land and proposed a contract. It would be an exclusive contract with the Fraley family, and the Marquis promised to consider it. Kiana didn't understand why he wouldn't give a clear answer, despite his smile. She immediately blurted out that this was much better than those shady loan schemes. She didn't want him taking advantage of the poor, but rather working with people who had resources. The Marquis immediately reported that he was no longer involved in that sort of thing. Then Miss Fraley decided to head to the Marquis's territory to do some research. She wanted to research a few things, including what Caesar had requested before, but she couldn't admit yet that the device was finished. Furthermore, Kiana asked to keep the device a secret for now, to avoid getting into trouble too early. She even hinted that the Crown Prince's son might appear. Just then, the Marquis almost shouted that His Highness had no son. He himself had heard from a reliable source that the prince definitely had no children. Kiana suddenly guessed the prince might have problems in that department, but promised to keep it a secret. Caesar looked at his companion in confusion, not understanding why she was saying such nonsense. He insisted that His Highness was perfectly healthy in that regard. When Kiana asked how the Marquis knew all this, he was so embarrassed he didn't know where to look. He wanted to disappear on the spot, but all he did was ask her to keep it a secret. Kiana wouldn't let it go. She was curious why the prince didn't just show up himself. I mean, he could just stroll right in and chop off the heads of everyone at that little party. The Marquis simply said she had no political sense. Then he explained that if His Highness just appeared and arrested everyone, all those involved would just sneer and say the prince was talking nonsense. And the issue would be decided, like everything else, at the Imperial Council, where everyone could argue for the Crown Prince's removal. The royal family needs to consolidate its authority, which requires two things. First, the support of the top nobles, and second, military power. Without these, even if the prince returned, this would all happen again. And Prince Heaton and his mother, they have the support of both the Perves family and the guards, though it will be harder now without Nyx. So the Marquis declared that the Crown Prince was off to a good start. The day of his return is near. Kiana suddenly realized that Caesar knew far too much about His Highness, but looking at his face, she could sense he knew even more than Joshua. She asked the Marquis to tell her immediately if he heard any news of the Crown Prince. Suddenly, the carriage gave a violent jolt. It hit a bump, and Kiana lost her balance, flying across the carriage. But Caesar caught her just in time to keep her from getting hurt. She could feel him holding her tightly, as if he didn't want to let her fall. Just then, the coachman's voice rang out, apologizing for the bumpy road. But Kiana could hear the Marquis's heartbeat, even louder. She looked up and saw Caesar staring down at her. He looked worried. Suddenly, there was a louder noise from outside, like something exploding, but it was just fireworks, and Kiana and the Marquis decided to enjoy the show. Caesar even hinted that this might be a way of announcing His Highness's arrival. It was said that these fireworks were to celebrate the Crown Prince's 17th birthday. He had planned the fireworks himself, wanting to show them to someone special, but he kept it a secret from them, as he felt it would be more satisfying to watch from a distance. Caesar said with a hint of irony that the celebration was ready, but the prince himself was nowhere to be found. And Heaton was using all the chaos of the day to make things even worse. He was practically saying that if the emperor and the crown prince didn't intervene, the world was his for the taking. Meanwhile, Prince Heaton was having a complete breakdown. At the docks, he watched the fireworks bloom, feeling as if they would never end. As Kiana watched the fireworks, she suddenly wondered if they weren't actually for the crown prince. He wouldn't be happy, but the Marquis disagreed with her. Then he brushed a strand of hair from her face and said it was beautiful. He was referring to the fireworks, which were reflecting beautifully in the lady's eyes. He was enjoying the moment so much. The beauty was almost suffocating. Kiana was completely stunned, thinking Caesar was just trying to take advantage of her. She started to have trouble breathing, feeling super awkward. She looked away, but could still feel his burning gaze. But she had already decided that this pretty-faced piece of trash was not for her. Suddenly, the Marquis started explaining things scientifically, talking about the carbon dioxide in the carriage. Kiana's mind was a mess. Her heart was racing, and her cheeks were flushed. Then the fireworks started again, and without thinking, she buried her face in his vest. Caesar decided not to ruin the moment and just held her tighter. The girl reminded him that he didn't have to try so hard, because they weren't a real couple. They were just business partners, and that was all. But the Marquis just treated it like a dream again, playing along with her. Just then, Kiana started to worry about him, explaining that the problem was his frequent visits to the imperial palace. She said the palace was making him hallucinate, and she pleaded with him to stay at his estate. She even suggested he get checked out, for his mental health. After that, she asked Caesar to let her go, but her words hit him so hard that he simply couldn't process them.